back again. It's another syllabus journal entry. Here we're facing the outrageous assault on American democracy and the twisted psychological operations and misinformation, the disinformation campaign spilling out of social media, mainstream media channels, the liars, the deceivers, subversive operators, ignorant, useful idiots there just to spin us out, to give us a false direction, a false narrative, a false lead, to make us enraged, to incite racial animosity and class warfare. This deep state coup d'etat of the globalist elite, the international administrative state, the technocracy of unelected, unaccountable, invisible power having systematically dissolved any semblance of functional democracy. We have to face the difficult road ahead. It's going to get ugly. I think that the American people are not prepared. So let's discuss it. So we're back again with the syllabus journal entry, and we have to thank some recent supporters. I want to give away your name. First letter of your name, D, and you were supporting us, and we appreciate the support, along with some of the other support that we get. And we want to just continue on with our move towards being absolutely transparent about the effects of the horrific political struggle that we're in here in the United States. And really you can see that it's an international struggle in the Western world. Western culture itself seems to be struggling to maintain a classical liberal understanding and control of its own government, so that you can see places like Germany and Austria around the world have become completely subverted and subordinated by their national governments in those countries. And as much as that they're going to be told what to do, when to do it, and there are all kinds of various technetronic nudges and control mechanisms are going to be used to control the people on every level. And for whatever reason, the people there have no ability to maintain their own standing and their own survival unless they're subordinated to the government in this way. So that the police, you can see the videos online of police running into shopping malls and beating the hell out of customers and women and different shoppers who don't have vaccine passports, or the digital passport that you're required to have as it relates to the epidemic period, this kind of declared state of global emergency over all the nations of the world. And even now in Boston and the cities in America are starting to just slowly become completely subsumed into this reckless ideology. And it doesn't, you can see out of the White House too, with Joe Biden, his totally bizarre and weird statements that are totally contradictory, so that everyone has to be, all the people who are vaccinated have to be deathly afraid of the unvaccinated. So it's just a dialectic. I mean, and it's for the people who don't know how to use your brain. So let me just help you out. If you're vaccinated, the presupposition for you is that you are protected from a pathogen or an infection. And so that the other people around you who may not be vaccinated, they don't endanger you because you're protected. So maybe you're not even able to intellectually follow that and that explanation that I gave you. And if you cannot, if it's just too much of a circular loop for you, then I don't know what to tell you. We're in bad shape. But the point is that the reckless propaganda coming out of Dr. Fauci and the rest of the people in Washington D.C. This is just a deep state, a totalitarian takeover of our entire society on every level. So it's the kind of same thing that happened with 9/11 too. All the Hollywood stars and Brad Pitt and Angela Jolie have to come out. Everyone has to come out on stage and say their little piece about, everyone, so it's just a propaganda campaign that just pushes everyone for the pharmaceutical military industrial complex to be, to have its way and to shape the history and shape the narrative that goes down on the headlines and ultimately becomes the history. And so, everyone has to go along with this. You're not allowed to be a dissident. You're not allowed to be an outlier or protest or a Protestant or a resistor or someone who doesn't want to, who wants just to maintain your own privacy and your own life. Even every man out in the farm, all the kulaks, everyone everywhere has to be, subsumed into the system. So that's why New York is totally shut down. Of course, everyone can read, and we can see the supposed Omicron. I mean, who here, raise your hand. My hand is down. If you have looked under the microscope at the Omicron, did you look at the differences that made it a mutation from the COVID-19? Raise your hand. Okay, so you have, and nobody really knows what the hell they're talking about, but just based on the words and the noises, the human sounds that have to be right now regarding Omicron, viral, supposed science, the scientism of it, will say that the Omicron is less deadly, and so in a lot of ways, most people will get it, and they might not even know that they have it. They will get no symptoms or very light symptoms. So what it means is that in a herd immunity, and in a larger scale immunity to geosocial, I guess, immunity is occurring against this particular outbreak of this coronavirus. And the mutations going downstream have become less and less lethal and less dangerous, when the symptoms are going to just be very mild. So the reason why we shut down New York City and force everyone to wear masks and to have 1,000 troops on the streets and to move forward with this Pentagon-led military program to oversee the vaccine, and of course the camps are coming. So now we have a full realization of the conspiracy theories of 3 years ago that you weren't allowed to think, you weren't allowed to know, you Alex Jones, InfoWars, right? You had to put on the wax into your ears, and you couldn't think because it was nonsense, it was conspiracy theory. You just go on and with your holidays and with your pre-programmed TV specials or whatever it is you do to participate in society, you don't want to be interrupted. You don't want anything to come along and push you in a direction where you no longer can participate in normal society and feel comfortable with everything is good with the world. So it really comes back to our normalcy bias again. We cannot allow anything to interrupt the normal, complacent, idle way of life that we enjoy. Nothing can interrupt it, right? So we're really, and my wife was pointing out that really this is all surrounding the collapse of the Federal Reserve System. So from 1913, when it got slid in, and when everyone was putting up the Aldrich Act, and they slid in the Federal Reserve System in there, and they had a new central bank, which was just, the federal government was going to borrow money from European banks. So let's not get all occult and shadowy about it, and let's not make it too hyper complex for us to understand. It's really just simply that we, at that time, had no more money. We couldn't really do World War I, and we had to go to the massive money powers in Europe to borrow, like many other kings and monarchs and czars of history have had to do. The Rothschilds or whoever you want to, just the different individuals who run the money program there in Europe, in the city of London. They're the same individuals that we began to just borrow our money from, and they printed out our dollar as international bank credit that we borrowed from them, and we would pay back. So 1913 goes to 1929, which is naturally a Great Depression, because this kind of European credit card, the MasterCard of London, couldn't sustain that kind of spending. And so, of course, we had the Great Depression. And Joseph P. Kennedy was one of the short sellers that was involved with that, a famous Knight of Malta, the father of JFK, right? Everybody knows that. This is information everybody knows. So you go into 1929. Of course, that's World War II. And from that point on, Americans have not been free. From those declarations of emergency banking disasters, the Emergency Banking Act, and the emergency this and the emergency that, there's always an emergency powers. There's always emergency federal powers that have to come out and have to just take over the Constitution and begin to run down the Bill of Rights and take away habeas corpus. There's always a disaster. There's always an emergency for the federal emergency FEMA, right? The Federal Emergency Management, blah, blah, blah. Right? That's what we're dealing with. Administration. The administrative state. The global administrative state that's in hoc to the banks in London, the Bank of England, right? Who basically were just having to sell everything we own in order to try to pay back this massive banking credit. And as the compounding and fractional debt reserve banking's program begins to require more and more of our wealth, we have to borrow more and more money. That's why we have to borrow trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars from these people, and we have to pay back an incomprehensible, impossible amount. Even the wealth of all the world cannot, and all the elitists and all the globalists put together cannot pay back the amount of money that we're borrowing. We're heading towards hyperinflation, not just stagflation, but just hyperinflation. So this is the kind of disaster we're dealing with. This is the kind of reality check that everyone needs to kind of get on board with and just face the music and just accept reality. It's not about a black pill. It's just that there's no easy solution. There's no answer to the dilemma that we're in. There's no way to vote ourselves out of this. There's no way for us to go to the uniparty of Davos in Washington D.C. and put our red or our blue hats on. It's not going to make any difference because we can't change the fact that our money system is collapsing. And it's the international reserve currency. So that international reserve currency, you have to go and try to buy a can of soda in your 7-Eleven today, and you just get out a $5 bill. And so this kind of spending is unsustainable because your wages are not going up. And even if you make $150,000 a year, it's not that much anymore, is it? The $150,000 a year is like the new $50,000. It's you know what I mean. So imagine the workers out there who have to deal with $13 an hour. And can you imagine? It's a kind of wage that you cannot survive on because your bills are mounting and the prices are going up so high that $13 doesn't even put a half a tank of gas in your car. So you don't have enough hours in the day in order to live anymore. And you're working yourself, your fingers to the bone, in a system like little gerbils on a hamster wheel, in a system of economy, of energy, an energy economy of your life, the moments of your life being spent working, trying to earn wealth, as the wealth depreciates and devaluates right in front of your eyes. And that devaluation, it's not coming back. It can't be restored again. So, you might want to just think about cryptocurrencies. You might want to think about getting into some Doge. You might want to think about some silver and gold coins and just find something that actually has intrinsic, inherent wealth in it and put your paper money in it now because the paper money is going to just be gone. It's ink and paper. And it used to be silver certificates. And even Kennedy, right before they killed him, that he tried to go back to, everyone, if you go look it up, he started to print silver certificates. He started making $5 and $10 bills, I believe, that were not Federal Reserve notes, but they were silver certificates, and they represented the value of silver. And so in that way, they could move off of a central bank system and a fiat currency and get back onto hard money, a stable money system. And people can complain about gold, but that's just kind of like doublethink. That's just kind of nuanced deception and subterfuge so that people won't want to just pour their dollars into gold and get out of the dollar altogether. And just because China and Russia are not holding dollars anymore. Anyway, moving on from that, we just want to do what we always do with the syllabus journal entry. We want to present new ideas. And remember, the lies are many, but the truth is just one. It always comes down to one single solitary thread of a radical and unspeakable truth. That's the reality of it. And everyone is hiding from it. Everyone wants to deal with it. Everyone wants to put their mask on and sheepishly go through it. Hey, I've done it. I've been there. I've been in the same boat. It's hard to stand up against the pressure of society and the push of social mores that underpin our whole society. And so people don't know how to stand against it. And those who do have to pay a terrible price. And we need to start being those who do. We need to start backing those who do. When you see people resisting and trying to maintain their own sanity, let's support them, guys. Let's understand that people have the right. And even if you've been vaccinated, people have the right to choose not to. And it's a great big experiment because later on, if things don't go well for these particular vaccines and there becomes some kind of pathogen that begins to break through our immunity and begins to destroy people who have taken and weakened their immune system with these vaccines, you could find out that you had made a losing bet. You're betting and gambling with your health and your children's health. So don't do it. I mean, you're deciding that the people in NIH and CDC know how to take care of your immune system better than you do. And that maybe that's something you believe. Maybe that's just some kind of, idea virus that gets pushed out from all the propaganda through the media and CNN and Fox and all the people in the Congress put on masks and everyone, Fauci said, this is going to be a real big problem. All the information is telling you to be terrified. And so it becomes panic porn. And if you're taken in by it, and because of this kind of oppressive threat that continues to pervade the media at all times regarding, in the courthouses and everyone pushing this, in the schools and the universities, everywhere you go. The program is to make you believe that this is the reality of the situation, that you're in terrible danger, and that unless you take these vaccines, you won't be healthy. And that you shouldn't, like Fauci said, you shouldn't invite people to Christmas this year if they're not vaccinated. So that's the kind of thing. And they've been doing this for years now. This isn't just a couple of weeks to do the curve. This is just a new program, a new way of life. And even all the CEOs in the airports and the airlines, if you will, got together with Congress to try to talk reason. And they don't need people to wear the mask on the planes because they're sitting how they're sitting, and they're not going to, there's just sanity is trying to be spoken. But the forces of the FDA, the federal powers, the imperialist overlords in Washington, D.C. have so much control over our lives that we need to go back and rethink this. We need to determine for ourselves a renewal of the Constitution, of the Bill of Rights, the enumerated powers that the Washington, D.C. is supposed to have, the limitations that they're totally, think about all the black book operations and the intelligence community and the CIA and all the off-the-book secret programs that are just absolutely out of control right now, that we're spending trillions and billions of dollars on. The FBI, the FBI, as they go around and try to rabble-rouse some kind of riots and some kind of insurrection, and try to use, the QAnon conspiracy channel in order to dial into the Patriot networks and get them all riled up. And it's all a bunch of BS. So we have to now go back to the drawing board as Americans and as individuals and free thinkers, and begin to decide for ourselves what our government is going to be. We are to self-govern. That begins at home. That begins with you. That begins with you taking care of the things in your life that need to be taken care of, and taking responsibility for the parts of your life that need to be taken responsibility for. And also, it's a call to responsibility and repentance. It's time for you to recognize that the men who fought in the American Revolution and gave us are the freedoms and the republic, the democratic republic that we have here in America today, the popular government, and the freedoms and the liberties that we have today, were men who were desperately seeking God to win that revolution against the tyrannists who were just marching through to rape, pillage, and plunder the colonies. And they were just as meaningless as the so-called Indian savages were to the redcoats. Okay, they had absolutely no use for them. They were just there to live in their homes, to use their material goods and food for their own necessity, and to take the gunpowder of the colonists and use it for their own purposes. And so the men there at that time had to resist or die. In order to resist and to win against such overwhelming odds of tyranny, they had to get on their knees to God. So if you don't think you're going to have to do that, and you think you're going to avoid it, and you're going to be like the QAnon guru who went in there with the horns in the Capitol, and you're just going to spout a bunch of UFO nonsense about crystals and about living past lives and being reborn again and again, and you're just going to be able to go in there and we're going to win this revolution based on a bunch of crap. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The brainwash and the sickness that pervades the internet, you've got to separate yourself from it. It's time for you to go to a new level and to do what it takes. Because it's going to look at the people that are in prison in Washington, D.C. right now, the January 6th protesters. They've been in there, going to be on over a year with no ability to really see your family, no ability to get court, to get bail, to get a reasonable sentence, to get anyone to really look at your case. You're just stuck in there with the habeas corpus is totally suspended. The Constitution is totally suspended in that city. Not here in my county, maybe not in your county or in your state, but there in that little tiny city, there's absolutely no law. It's total tyranny. It's a dungeon. They're in a dungeon. And we need to deal with that. And people are scared because New York State's going to have 1,000 troops out in the street. Well, you know what? The Redcoats in New York during the Revolution, the American Revolution, they had 1,000 Redcoats too. And the Americans and their freemen at that time had to deal with that because it doesn't make you feel good to have to fight against your own country, to fight against your own society, to fight against your own army. The people that are supposed to be there to protect you are now being used against you. And that is a fight that no one wants. That's the fight that the people, the founders of this country, didn't want. It's not a fair fight. It's not a regular warfare against the other, one army against another. It's just the army there to put down the people, to control them, to kill them, to silence them, to shut them up, and tell them how it's going to be with the end of their muzzles. That's what the redcoats were doing there, and that's what those soldiers are being called out into the streets in New York to do also. So God help the people that can't get out of New York. They can't come to a free state like Texas or a free state like Florida or other free states. Like it looks like Arizona, if they get their new governor, it'll be a free state. But these free states, the people who don't have money to move are stuck, and they're in the hands of horrifying tyranny. And we all need to pray about that. Pray to God. If you don't believe in God, maybe now's the time to just give it a shot, because if God's not there, then we're doomed. So before I go and just completely spend the entire time monologuing about all the things that bother me, let's just take a few minutes here to listen to some of the information on this new interview on geopolitics and empire. It's one of the staple news sources we have to rely on in order to get a really good perspective of what's going on. So let's listen to this interview, and of course in the show notes we'll try to add in all the different notes of the links for this so you can follow up.
Kind of a bleak assessment of things, given the context of, I put it in the context of the whole Great Reset and the crown virus coup d'etat, as Robert Kennedy Jr. puts it. And I'm saying you've got black pills for us, and you know what? I largely share the same view as you, and so today is, Black Pill Day. And back in September, you gave a talk at the Ron Paul Institute in what may have been one of your last public appearances for the foreseeable future, and the theme was that it's later than you think. And you've said you're sort of, running for the hills, and this is a growing trend. A number of my podcast guests have talked about doing this, and some have actually already done it. I'm trying to do it, and this is kind of a sign and confirmation that indeed things are getting worse than we really wish to admit. For me, I'll say it's essentially the 1930s all over again. There's a lot of moving parts, as you just mentioned, to what's going on. Cultural revolution, destruction of the economy, middle class, push for military conflict, this global political coup d'etat, and the technocratic digital dictatorship. So kind of what's your kind of frame of reference? Is it kind of like the Great Reset, or is it stuff that was already ongoing, before the crown virus hit?
Well, I think that's not an either or question. It is a great reset, and it's one that certainly the people behind it. I think people point at Davos and Klaus Schwab and people like this and say this is something these people have wanted to do for decades, and which would basically turn. I guess the nice way to put it would be the vast majority of the world's population to serfs, who are dependent upon a financial and economic structure that they don't really have a stake in anymore, that's controlled by a handful of global corporations and a self-appointed elite class, and the rest of us will, as they say, you will own nothing and you will be happy and we'll eat bugs and we'll enjoy it. And that's the future being prepared for us. And I do think that a radical depopulation is part of that as well. I was just listening to the news in the car today, and it said that this is the lowest, the last year, I think, was the lowest demographic growth rate in America since the United States has existed, since 1776. And I said, well, part of it's because so many people died from COVID. Well, whether they died from COVID or not is a whole other story. But because of things like, it's not so much the COVID itself, but the measures imposed supposedly to deal with the COVID that not only break down the economy, have people isolated, in abusing substances, abusing one another, committing suicide. You notice nobody even asked the question, what are the human costs of the life-saving measures that are supposedly being imposed on us? You think any kind of rational health policy based on cost and benefits would have a weighing between what the threat is and what the measures are to deal with it. If you look at it in those terms, you cannot possibly explain anything we're seeing in the world today. If you're looking at it in terms, as you suggested, the imposition of a great reset that has been long in the works, yes, it all makes a whole lot of sense. And I think that's what we're seeing. And frankly, Herbert, I think a lot of people are aware of that. And you see so many people now saying, the narrative is breaking down. They can't sustain this. I don't notice that makes any difference. The fact that there are no facts to support it, the fact that none of these things make any sense, doesn't make any difference. The ban plays on. The mandates continue. The shutdown. We're right. I'm not that far from the Washington D.C. area. They're already reimposing the mask mandates and all that stuff. They're starting to close things down again. Why? Over a variant that doesn't kill anybody? None of that makes any sense if you were worried about health. If it's about something else, it all makes perfect sense. So I think we have that. We have the plummeting popularity of that dried out husk of what used to be Joe Biden in the White House. I don't think anybody can really take him seriously anymore as a supposed president. But then we have waiting in the wings Willie Brown's girlfriend, who's even less credible than he is as a national leader. Unfortunately, that also feeds the expectation of some people to say, now the Republicans are going to really clean up in the 2022 congressional elections, and Donald Trump's going to come back in 2024. Leaving Trump aside in 2024, even if the Republicans do take the House of Reprehensibles in 2022, what are they going to do with it? What are they going to do with it they didn't do back when they had the Senate and the White House under Trump? They're just going to carry water for their big corporation clients who are their real constituents, not the people who vote them in. And they'll worry about what's good for the financial class. That they're going to be carrying water for the same woke corporations that are behind the current policies. So I don't see anything fundamentally changing there. As I keep telling people, we are not going to vote our way out of this thing. I think we're looking at not only the potential breakdown of the American Republic in any constitutional sense. In fact, I think we have to talk about the American Republic and constitutionalism in the past tense, but also when it gets down to the human level, stores, supply chains, inflation, all of that stuff. How can people sustain themselves? And is that, I don't think that's just a national phenomenon. That would be a global phenomenon. And that's not even getting to the questions that I'm sure we'll address regarding peace and war. I think you said this is black pill. I think, yes, for the short term, it's hard to look at any rays of sunlight out there. Somebody said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, unfortunately, that's the train coming the other way. And I think that's what we're looking at right now. That does not mean, though, there is not going to be something hopeful at the other end of whatever this period looks like. I think there will. I do have not only faith in God, but some degree of confidence in human nature that something positive will come out of this. But it's way too early to know what that looks like. This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. We're still going into the crisis phase. We're nowhere near coming out of it or even seeing what that exit looks like.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but I don't think, as you said, like voting and some of these small victories that people have been having regarding, local mandates and things, they're just pushing on through. As you said, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, I don't know, protesting in Europe. They're just pushing everything on through. So this is like classic tyranny, totalitarianism. Once this momentum begins, there's no stopping that train until it's done its damage. I just wanted to go back to one point on the Great Reset. My next guest is going to be Patrick Wood, the technocracy expert, and I guess for me, one of my biggest kind of fears in all of this currently is this, medical tyranny, which is the pretext to establish this technocratic scientific dictatorship of the social credit system or whatever. And other things I'm not so worried about because I think they can be mitigated to different extents. You could move to another geographic location, change jobs or whatever, but you can't really escape from the digital tyranny, especially if it seems like every country is trying to implement it. What's your take on? We can't even travel essentially anymore, and now they're talking about not just in the U.S., in all countries. Canada's already applied it. Here in Mexico, governors have floated the idea of an internal Soviet passport system where between the 30 Mexican states, you need vaccine certificates to exit and enter. So, what's your take on this new form of totalitarianism?
I think that is the apt term for it. Again, I don't know all the details of where this is going, but I pretty much decided my traveling days are over, that even though it's still possible to get on a plane and go somewhere without getting the Fauci ouchie or having your piece of paper showing that you're with the program. You hear calls, for example, of making it impossible to start across state lines, even driving anymore. You don't know how far these restrictions will go, and I think to some extent, even in some of our bigger cities here in America, we're a little bit isolated from how bad those factors have become in other countries in the world, like Australia and some countries in Europe, where you can't go anywhere, you can't leave your house. Maybe you can go to the grocery store for at least the time being, but even that may be revoked at some point. I think that's why they are getting the big demonstrations in Europe that we're really not seeing here in the United States, that they're under a much more severe regime than we are. But I also expect that that's probably just a matter of time. The one ray of hope there is I do think there are some states in the United States that will not mandate that. People have been pointing at, for example, Governor DeSantis in Florida as being sort of a paragon resistor of all this kind of stuff. Maybe on the broader political question, that hastens some move toward a breakup of the United States in some form. It's not going to look like 1861, and it may not happen at all. But I think the extent to which there can be some, you might say, informal but nonetheless effective breaking apart of central authority and state and local governance, and also people moving around within the country. Somebody called it the big sort, where people, it's almost like what you see during, wars in places like Yugoslavia or Lebanon or somewhere where you say, you know what, things are getting bad, I better go where my tribe is. I need to go live among the people who think like me and away from the people who don't think like me. And that's, maybe that's what we're moving toward in this country as well. I don't know if they can get to the same degree of lockdown here in the United States, or at least across the country, that we've seen in other countries. But I'm sure that's what they would like to do. And again, this is maybe where it gels with the politics. This administration's credibility, I think, is in the dumpster. On the other hand, if the Republicans ever get their hands on any lever of powers, what exactly are they going to do about it? I don't have much faith in that.
Yeah, and I wanted to go back to kind of what you touched on in your September speech, and there have been many others on the internet lately discussing this. We had the professor from Europe called, I think, Matthias Desmiet, who talked about mass formation and the psychology of tyranny, but you touched on this where you discussed the propensity of so many people to go along with this fascist, whatever form of totalitarianism, technocracy. And I guess this is textbook history, and the same thing has happened over and over in the 1930s and other time periods. But today, we have so much information in open source in real time, which allows us to diagnose precisely, what is happening, who is doing it, how they are doing it, and yet nobody cares. Like, they still fall for it hook, line, and sinker, just as they always have in history. And I can't understand it. How do you make sense of the population's, goose step?
Yes, somebody called this the little Stalin syndrome, where somebody gets a little teeny ounce of authority and he lords it over everybody else because he can. And I think, unfortunately, there is that aspect of human nature. But I think the other thing you touched on, we have so much information available to us, but it doesn't seem to me primarily a lack of information. You can have two people looking at exactly the same information, and they come to radically different conclusions. It seems that it somehow reverberates with whatever their underlying suppositions are, and that there's some people who've completely drunk the Kool-Aid. Anything our wise and benevolent authorities tell us for our own good has to be true and right, and we must follow them and support them in every way. And if you are resisting, then you are a traitor. You're an agent of Emmanuel Goldstein. You are basically somebody who's trying to destroy everybody else. You're going to make me sick because you haven't gotten the safety measure that I've gotten that doesn't seem to be working anyway. But from our point of view, I assume we're probably in agreement on this point, that's totally and absolutely irrational, but the same people would look at us and say, oh, you're just falling for conspiracy theories and your view doesn't make any sense. You don't believe the science, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what you do with that. I think we're talking about some phenomenon of human psychology, partly dependent on views of authority. That if you have some attitude toward authority as, well, the people in charge have our best interests at heart and they are always right, yeah, that is a totalitarian mindset. And I hate to say this because I'm sure some people will be offended. I notice that women seem to be more amenable to this, that they maybe are a little more conformist in their thinking. They want to be good people, decent people, caring people. And so when they're told that this is necessary to protect other people and it's a sign of how much you care about other people, they have a tendency to go along. I mean, a lot of men do too, of course, but I think women more so. And there are other people who say, you know what, a lot of it comes down to me is this, is that if you start from the notion this is all for our good by the health authorities, you'll come to one set of conclusion. If you start with we're ruled by criminals and dishonest people, well, then you come to different conclusions. You are, and look, I'll admit it. Maybe I go too far in that direction. Maybe my instinct is kind of like those people who lived in, say, the Soviet Union decades ago, to say, you know what? If the authorities are saying it must be a lie, that start from the notion that whatever they say is probably untrue, or at least significantly distorts the truth, rather than trying to say, okay, what are they saying? What are the so-called conspiracy theorists saying? What are any other social media or foreign media saying? And try to triangulate and come to some approximation of the truth, because you never can be quite sure. You do your best, but you don't put your faith in anybody wholeheartedly, because nobody's trustworthy now.
Yeah, I agree with you again, and I think you hit one of the key points. And most of the people around me, especially here in Mexico, just want to obey authority. But especially here in Mexico, my point is that up until now, all of you have been complaining about how corrupt, like we know the Mexican government is extra special corrupt, right? They rendition the federal police, rendition students and people to the narcos and that sort of thing, and everyone's like, oh, it's so corrupt. And then, magically, all of a sudden, they care for our health. And again, I mean, you covered that, but I want to touch on what you talked about DeSantis and kind of like a soft secession and civil war. Just this week, like another aspect of that has popped up. We've just seen multiple op-eds coming from the establishment, from the Jeff Bezos, Pentagon, Washington Post, specifically from senior military officials, retired, I guess, putting the idea out there of civil war to come from 2022 to 2024 and beyond. And I almost feel as if we're experiencing the Bolshevik Revolution, but in slow motion and with less violence until now. And we're currently going through the revolution phase. And next comes the 5-year, white versus red civil war period. And it's as if the establishment is abating and wants violence from the populace, which it then in turn can use as a pretext for cementing their power further. And today, I think another colleague of yours who you follow, Nebojša Malić, he put out a commentary on RT seeming to agree as well. So, what are your thoughts on, it seems like they want to create some kind of false flag or some type of scenario from the establishment. It seems like they're not getting it from the populace.
That's entirely possible. And it's interesting you mentioned Nebojša, because he had written something a few months ago after all the controversy with regard to the election. He's saying, hey, everybody's talking about there might be a civil war. I got news for you. There just has been one and you lost. That the, neo-Bolshevik regime, or as I called, frankly, in 1997, I wrote an article in Chronicles magazine called Rainbow Fascism at Home and Abroad. And, just as we had, brown fascism, red fascism in the previous decades in the 20th century, we have this kind of rainbow fascism now. It's a different ideological content, wokeness, CRT, the LGBT, all of the stuff that goes into the witch's brew of their ideology but the fascist mentality, or Stalinist, or whatever you want to call it, the totalitarian mentality is the same. A lot of it does depend on having all the willful, compliant collaborators with that. But you're right. I don't think we've even seen the beginning of how demonized the resistors are going to be. I think we saw a little glimpse of that in the way the January 6th so-called insurrectionists are being treated to almost total silence. I mean, except for, Tucker Carlson maybe. Who else is really, pointing the finger, shining the spotlight on what's going on there? And but I think that's just the beginning of it, where all of us people who are, racist, sexist, homophobic, science deniers, blah blah blah, everything, this side of flat earthers and maybe them too, are basically going to be considered enemies of the people. And as the FBI director and other people have said, the Attorney General, the biggest threat to America today is white supremacy. And of course, all of these things in this kind of phantasmagoria of evil of resistors all boils down to that. So if you can say that these people are a white nationalist terrorist group, and they deny the vax, and they do all these things, all these evil people. Yeah, I would. Let's put it this way, Hervé. And this will get also to the foreign policy aspect as well. Recently, I think it was like the last day or two, the Russians warned that some kind of a fake chemical attack may take place in Ukraine to legitimate whatever comes next, just like we saw in Syria on so many occasions. And even when the Syrians warned, this is going to happen, and then it happens, they say, oh, look what the Syrian government just did. You cannot exorcise that ghost by saying they're about to do it. So I wouldn't at all be surprised if we see some kind of horrendous terrorist attack from whatever bad thing category it is. Some people, for example, pointed to that supposed plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan, which was, of course, was all entrapment by the FBI, as again another step along the road to demonizing the opposition. So I think we're certainly going to see that. What measures they may kick off with that, I don't know, in terms of actually moving from, let's say, a soft totalitarianism to something resembling a harder totalitarianism. By the way, I think that's also part of the purpose behind the mandate for all the federal agencies, particularly the armed forces and the law enforcement community, because that's how you get out all the people you don't consider reliable, all the people who have a conscience or say, I don't just blindly follow orders. Okay, they're going to be gone soon. And then you have a force that is willing to do whatever they're told to do, because after all, it would be denying science or, racist or homophobic or whatever it might be, not to follow orders. So I think you're absolutely right about. Something's coming down the pike. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, and I think other guests of mine have said, and I agree as well, that that's a classic strategy of fascist or Bolshevik revolutions, right. Immediately removing the critical thinkers, intellectuals.
So I thought that it was necessary for you to hear that entire discussion, and that was Jim Jatres on the Geopolitics and Empire podcast. And they're just really trying to unscrew their own heads, and just like we all are, and trying to really understand the multi-dimensional, the three-level chess match that we're in here as we move forward and trying to maintain our liberties in the United States of America, and of course around the world. Other places are not doing so well. Places, governments, nations that don't have the different founding documents that we have. We're blessed by God to have the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the different laws that protect our individual liberties and are really enshrined in the government and in the principles of our lawmaking apparatus, so that the actual people are not crushed under the machinations and the tyranny of governments. And that's what you've seen throughout history, and of course that's what we're dealing with today. And as we're going forward, I have to just point out to you that there was an important book written, a radical book, and it's called The Coming Insurrection, and it was written by the Invisible Committee, and I've talked about it before. and it's something that we've discussed. It was originally published in 2007. And it's basically a manual, a manifesto designed to call forth all the different radical elements around the world to the destruction of the West. And of course, really a lot of this is surrounding the eventual hyperinflation of the U.S. dollar. And if you take a careful look at your currency and take a bill out and look at the very top of any legal document has to state what the document is. And the top of your legal document on your bill is a Federal Reserve note. And those notes are really banknotes of credit. And those particular banknotes of credit have already been borrowed, and their value has already been discharged, and the bank has to be paid back. And of course, that's why you have to pay your taxes in Federal Reserve notes. You can't pay your taxes with gold or silver. You think they would take it. You're like, here, I have an old Porsche. It's worth $100K. You want to take it and discharge my debt. And the IRS, which is incorporated out of Puerto Rico for tax reasons, will not take your Porsche or your diamonds because they have to have Federal Reserve notes in order to discharge all your debt. So all your goods and commodities have to be turned back into Federal Reserve notes in order to pay the government and to do a lot of different transactions. Just like, you committed a crime, and this particular penalty could be 6 months in jail or $1,000 fine. And it's always either or, because your time in prison could only be offset or discharged with Federal Reserve notes, and they won't take diamonds or Porsches either. So this is a system by which the same thing when you have to pay tickets and everything else. It's the intake by which the system takes back in dollars, and of course from which the system up in Washington D.C. had printed them out originally. And in the meantime, we use them and we trade them as denominations of value, and that value is slipping away and it's deteriorating, it's becoming null. And as that happens, there will be this collapse of the West, this huge economic collapse. It doesn't mean that capitalism doesn't work. It just means that if you're a nation, a sovereign nation, an independent and free nation, you shouldn't borrow all your money from the banksters in London. That's what it means. Because when you borrow all your money from them, then your fractional reserve, the compounding debt interest, the law of 72, the different factors that impoverish you or an individual, just like when you try to use a credit card, and you can't use a credit card and swipe it and pay it off at 25% interest to get wealthy, right? Well, neither can a nation. A nation is impoverished this way. And as this impoverishment creeps up and becomes more catastrophic, and the tidal wave, the black hole, or the whirlpool of collapsing debt, the fines will go up. When you have to pay your tickets, they're astronomical already. When you have to go buy a gallon of milk, it'll go up, as it always has been, because you can remember when just a year ago or a few years ago, it's visible now and noticeable. It's not gradual, the devaluation. So you understand this, that the value of gold is relatively fixed, in as much as that gold, it doesn't change its value. And when I first started observing, the price of gold per ounce, it was $300 per ounce. I was a young man, and it seemed like, that's a lot, and I really was foolish, because at that time it was very cheap, right? So it's going up quite a lot per ounce of gold. And so it will continue to do so. And as the money devaluates, the price of gold will go up, because the price of gold is fixed. So it's not actually the price of the gold that's changing, it's the value of money. And so it's how many Federal Reserve notes it's required for you to buy that gold that's changing. Okay, so the ounce is still the same price as it was when it was $300. It's just that $300 is now the same value as $2,000, because the value of money has changed. It's a goalpost. That's why prices are going up. So maybe you needed that little lesson in economics to understand that you need to get out of the dollar and to get into something that's valuable. Buy a Picasso like the wealthy people do. Buy name brand high-end cars, because 10 years later they're still worth something in the garage, but a Toyota is not. You see what I'm saying? If you buy a Porsche, and 10 years later it'll still have some kind of value, perhaps. That's the thinking. But anyway, far be it for me to tell you what to do with your money. But really what we need to address is this invisible committee. It was the invisible committee that printed out this evil genius pathway to the destruction of America and the destruction of the West by, waiting for a moment when you could kick us when we were down. You could wait till the American people were down, like Eric Holder famously said, and you could kick the legs out from the American people when you're the government, when they most need it, desperately need you. So you can see in 2007, the people that are printing out this invisible committee are not easy or not difficult to discover. It's not a big secret that the Clinton-Obama factions and the radical Antifa factions of the Democrat Party and their billionaire elite of patrons there in Silicon Valley and the wealthy individuals the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates of the world, and the new class of wealthy billionaire individuals who are inventing and directing and designing the technetronic prison that we're living in here are with the Invisible Committee. They are the Invisible Committee. So you can see the sophistication of the book, The Coming Insurrection. It's going to define this systematic deep state control in Washington, D.C., linking with Antifa, through the White House. And so at the time in 2007, it might have been hard to imagine in the Bush years, but you have to recognize that the radical Bolsheviks, the neo-Bolsheviks, have taken over the systems and the mechanisms of power in America, and indeed we have lost this war. That's the black pill. We have lost this war, and they're ramping up these systems of power, the FEMA, CDC, these institutions of authority, and they're going to be using them against the American people. That's why they have these in camps. That's why in Australia and Canada, the program has moved so far forward without any resistance because they have no constitutional protections. They have no habeas corpus. They have no right to expect that the government's going to provide them with any protections because the government exists as a commonwealth chase of power from London through the throne, through the crown, right? So that's why they call it the crown virus, because ultimately this mechanism of biosecurity police tyranny that was designed was ultimately coming out of China, and ultimately that plan came out of London and their royal institutes of health and so on and so forth. And those are podcasts that we developed previously. That's information that's widely disseminated. People should know that these mechanisms that created this virus in Wuhan were instigated in the Royal Institutes in London, and they were paid for by the NIH and the large resources of Washington, D.C. and the deep state, right under the nose of apparently Donald Trump and to the delight of this psychopath Biden. So I'm not pleased with either one. I worry deeply that the red-blue dialectic is being set up for us, and as we try to cling to Trump because he's the apparent, victor, the apparent, hero that we need, the champion that will help us in our time of need, that, if he is not, he has no integrity, if he's not accountable, if he's like the Austrian from Vienna. I mean, I've never met the man. I have nothing bad to say about him. And I hope that his rise to power will be something that the American people can count on in 10 years from now. But I do worry that this is a replay of the 1930s again, and that ultimately he's a billionaire from Manhattan, and that if he's in the pocket of the banking elite, that it doesn't matter which way we go, it's just going to further the plan for the medical establishment tyranny and for the masking and for just for the absolute arbitrary insanity of the new internationalist global policies that we see coming throughout the world today. And your ability to travel, your ability to get food. I mean, they ultimately can step on these different valves of lifelines that we need as far as the trucking that ships all the goods across our entire country, the prices of gas. I mean, the entire establishment of our economy and our way of life here in America is being targeted. And I think that's what we need to wake up to, and we need to recognize that this invisible committee that set up this coming insurrection with the Trump individuals walked right into. And I'm looking at Trump and I'm wondering why he held that rally in Washington, D.C. and the FBI And the Ray Epps of the world, if you look at the Revolver News accounts, were able to spin into a total catastrophe, into a white supremacy, radical takeover of our government because some Trump guys got bamboozled in a false flag operation. And it looks like Antifa was there with the Ray Epps and the different factions and the Proud Boys and the different radical groups. Apparently the Proud Boys had their leader was ultimately an FBI, a spook in the end, and some kind of, so the entire operation of the Proud Boys is just ultimately a program developed from the intelligence agencies used against the American people to capture some of these victims that we have in prison from January 6th last year. So we have these guys in jail, no rights, no habeas corpus. It's absolutely absurd, and it's supposed to be a message to the rest of us that New York, Boston, Washington D.C, and all those other cities up north that are in total alignment, geological and ley lined, and as far as actual Great Circle alignment with the City of London and with the power structure there that surrounds Stonehenge, right? The old system of pagan worship that existed there. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a reversion to the power elite and their religion. Their religio-cultic system of empire is something that we're going to have to deal with. But as we go forward, let's talk about the Invisible Committee, and let's talk about the coming insurrection in that book and what it means to us now. Because people were talking about it before all this happened. We just need to accept that. And then as the information was published here, we're going to do a little clip by Glenn Beck, and he's going to talk about the Invisible Committee and the coming insurrection in that book that was published in 2007, and we just watched it happen right to us. Okay? So let's take a look.
Everything we're seeing today can be found within the pages of these two books. I will add a third book to this, but not tonight. It's almost as if the radicals of today are using them both as an unabridged playbook to kickstart their own modern-day revolution. When I was at Fox, we talked about this extensively. This is the copy that I first made my notes in to share with you, and it's terrifying. It might be one of the scariest books you'll read until I assign you the third book to read. It's a call to arms to radicals. It's an attempt to awaken the leftist sleeper cells to bring forth a violent revolution. It was written by communists masquerading as democratic socialists, and it talks about the imminent collapse of the capitalist culture. This book is trying to collapse the West. Now, it was first published in France in 2007 when I found it, and it was split up into two parts. The first part is a bunch of, Marxist crap, basically complaining why they believe capitalism is the root of all that is evil in the world. But the second part is more disturbing. Beginning under the section called Get Going, the authors lay out a pathway to revolution. The main strategy is to wait for a crisis, economic, environmental, or political, then begin attacking government institutions, corporations, and police. Now think about that. Think about that for a second. And then listen to what is happening to the Department of Homeland Security just over the last few days. The acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Claire Grady, sent a department-wide memo on Saturday warning people of recent developments. She said, quote, "This assessment is based on specific and credible threats that have been levied against certain DHS employees and a sharp increase in the overall number of the general threats against the DHS employees." Grady goes on to instruct the DHS employees not to wear any identifying markings outside of official buildings, not to talk about where they work or in public or in social media, and to keep their windows and doors locked in their homes. She warned them to be alert and aware of any unexpected changes in their neighborhoods. Does that sound healthy? Last week, WikiLeaks went and did it again. They leaked more information, over 9,000 current and former ICE employees and all of their information. They did this, quote, to increase accountability. Or did they? What kind of accountability are you looking for by pointing radicals to people's homes? It's not an oversight that they're looking for. It's insurrection. Ever since that leak, DHS has received over 20 credible threats. In one instant, a burnt and decapitated animal corpse was left on a DHS employee's porch. I don't know. Sound good? This recent assault on DHS is almost taken directly out of the insurrection. In fact, let me quote, "We live under an occupation, under police occupation. Undocumented immigrants are rounded up in the middle of the street." And they go on to talk about how they're going to act. Let's see here. Therefore, weapons certainly don't have a hope of rivaling theirs, the police, in firepower, but it can be used to hold them at a direct distance, redirect attention, exercise psychological pressure, or force passage, and gain ground by surprise. Now, would this include a decapitated and burnt animal corpse on the front porch? Would that qualify as psychological pressure? What about just making physical threats? Stalking DHS employees at their homes, swarming them at restaurants? Where does it go from here? Even the LA Times is pumping the brakes a little bit and asking whether all this has gone too far. I think yes is the answer to that. But don't get me wrong, that's good. If we don't get more people to stop and take a breath here, we're going to get dangerously close to the final section in the book. This section says things like, take up arms. Take up arms, do everything possible to make their use unnecessary. Against the army, the only victory is political. There is no such thing as a peaceful insurrection. Weapons are necessary. It's a question of doing everything possible to make using them again unnecessary. Well, you can't have a revolution without first a controlling of the narrative. You've got to own the culture, or your movement is dead on arrival.
So Glenn Beck does a nice introduction to the idea and to the ideology of the coming insurrection in that manual, that manifesto by the Invisible Committee that it was published in 2007, which is relatively recently. And you can see it's the neo-Marxist radical playbook. And you have to recognize that in this particular equation, this particular conspiration and combination of asymmetrical warfare that was waged against the American democracy involved the FBI. It involved directors of the CIA lying in front of Congress. It involved members of the legislative body in the Congress. It had members of the media, whoever runs the newsreel that they read off of. There at the media outlets, the Silicon Valley, through the tech giants and the social media organizations that basically run our lives on our smartphones, and so many different levels. And in politics, political figures on the left and political figures on the right work together to bring about this January 6th so-called insurrection. And even the word insurrection, there wasn't an insurrection at any other time when Antifa and Black Lives Matter groups were pillaging the countryside and attacking different towns and cities throughout the United States. At that time, that was just a furtherance of the Invisible Committee's program towards the coming insurrection. Now, when the people and I'm not defending what some of those people did and some of the violence that happened that day. That should be punished and people should go to jail. But you have to recognize that the double standard is made to be unacceptable and noticeable and remarkable, so that the people out, the George Soros DAs that are financed throughout the different counties and different hyper-local areas throughout the United States, different cities and the different jurisdictions throughout different states. There's a lot of areas where district attorneys are just letting Antifa and BLM rioters go free. And of course, you can expect that this double standard legally is part of this entire program. So ultimately, criminals are going free, but patriots who get tricked by an FBI PSYOP program and rioters and who walk through the Capitol are suddenly held in perpetuity. Will they be in there for 5 years or for 10 years in the dungeon? No one really knows. And that's the question. We have to get back to a defense of those people and to look at how their rights are being infringed so severely and in such a capricious way, so that everyone can see openly that the tyranny is now ideological reality within the court systems and within. It goes all the way up to the correctional facilities itself and the wardens, and how they're just ultimately holding political prisoners and those who are being persecuted for being on the wrong side of the politics. And like we said, a lot of the original actors who are going to start the events and start tearing down the barricades and start attacking police on January 6th are going to be Antifa figures who are there, who are tattooed, who are with their hats backwards, wearing Trump flags as capes, and attacking police for the cameras. So all of this, and it doesn't matter if we sort it all out, we can demonstrate it just piece by piece, just like they're doing at revolver.com, the little news site there. They're able to bravely go through there. And look at Veritas, Project Veritas, same thing. They're exposing this to the world, and it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter how obvious and transparent their machinations and their violations are. The idea is just to make the incursion permanent, make this biosecurity police state permanent, keep this persecution against Americans who are patriotic and who want to defend their constitution and their liberties and their right to bear arms and their right to free speech and all the rights. And the people who even know what the Bill of Rights are simply now going to be broken down as racists, as white supremacists, and as terrorists, as the apparatus of the deep state uses the intelligence apparatus and like they said before, they were really just purifying the ranks by getting rid of everyone who doesn't want to go along with their program, with critical race theory or just strange experimental vaccines that are not healthy. Anyone who doesn't want to just further the decline of this, as we had said before, asymmetrical warfare against the government establishment itself. And so I think the machinations of the Invisible Committee are coming from the deep state. The program, the propaganda, and the manifesto of the coming insurrection was something that was designed by those elite globalist powers that are corrupt and sold out within Washington, D.C. And they have designed this war and the language of it and the shape of it and the direction of it to ultimately target the American people in a technocracy with a digital citizenship, a digital passport, a digital future where we're becoming serfs once again. So as we discuss that, we need just to briefly turn our attention towards the episode here of The War Room with Steve Bannon. And he really kind of breaks down a lot of different sort of high-velocity news shows, so he has a lot of information he's hitting with, but he's really going to break down the kind of witch hunt, the kind of arcane, good old-fashioned witch hunt that they've cooked up and blaming unvaccinated people for the Omicron, so that just as you can imagine back in the distant past, in the ages of ignorance and superstition, that man would blame, misfortune on the witches and just find someone to burn at the stake, and the most irrational and depraved instrumentality of the human psyche that allows us just to find victims of our own hate and our own fear. And whenever one of the livestock gets sick, then we got to go burn Sarah Goodall down at the street and burn her alive, because Mercy Goodall saw her dancing with the devil by the moon, and just the irrational madness and hysteria that arises out of this sense of displacement and insecurity and the obvious warfare, academic and intellectual and political and on all levels, so that the American psyche has broken into two completely distinct and separate entities, and they're seeing and hearing and understanding totally separate things, so that you have individuals who take part in this woke ideology, and they'll take as many vaccine boosters as you tell them. They'll take one a week. They'll do whatever you say. And then you have the other side of it, the nationalist patriot community, who are just not going to believe a single word that comes out of Washington, D.C. or out of these politicians' mouths, because ultimately you can see in history the kind of disaster that befalls those who foolishly play into the hands of lying politicians, and the wars that they bring, and the deep state apparatus itself, which was really being, apparently, from our point of view as the public, being shaken by the Trump administration, ultimately was able to get rid of the Trump administration. And like George Soros said, the Trump administration is really ultimately a temporary phenomenon that he regarded would soon pass away, and that it did. And so, as we're moving forward, let's take a listen to this interesting episode with Steve Bannon, and we'll talk after.
As Charlemagne kind of went in for the tough questions, then later, Kamala Harris said we were not prepared. Her lips did not come from Human Events or Raheem Kassam or Steve Bannon. No, she said we were not prepared. We were caught unprepared for Delta and Omicron. And then over the weekend, we've had one thing after the other. The Rockette shut down. Saturday Night Live doesn't go on. We just got word we're going to have Ben Harnwell in from Europe. Davos is canceled. They're shutting down all of Europe. In New York City, a complete shutdown of the Christmas, of things going on for Christmas. De Blasio, remember, they ran on order and stability versus Trump's chaos. This is what order and stability you got. They're not prepared. They admit they're not prepared. Fauci had to come out and say, oh, no, we were super prepared. We're over-prepared. Well, where are the tests? Remember, they on President Trump nonstop on the tests. Where are the tests? Where are the tests? This is the administrative state not being able to deliver. There's hour waits in New York City. So you have the implosion on Omicron, and Biden's going to come on tomorrow, and here's what he's going to do. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, and they're moving towards draconian actions on vaccines, as we told you. Ben Harnwell was going to come on here. The German health minister said yesterday, bang, we're going to have mandatory vaccines for the unvaccinated. Just like in Austria, we told you it was going to happen in Germany, it's going to happen in Great Britain, and it's coming here to the good old United States of America. This is what Biden's going to do. They're going to triple down on their incompetence. Right now, this thing is completely spinning out of control. You've got Collins, who we finally ran out of here. Remember, this guy was supposed to be the guy you could never get rid of. Dr. Collins of NIH, Fauci's boss. His last day is December 31st. Of course, all he's doing all weekend is how Trump tried to force me to make hydroxychloroquine, these therapeutics, these phony therapeutics, actual reality. Well, we're going to get into all the science of that later. We've got individuals from Great Barrington, because what did we find out over the weekend from emails? We found out from emails over the weekend that on the Great Barrington Declaration, that Collins and Fauci conspired immediately when the Great Barrington Declaration came out. They conspired immediately and said, we've got to put a firestorm up here. We've got to destroy these individuals. This could be a problem. Remember, Great Barrington was about, hey, we should have therapeutics, targeted interventions for the most vulnerable of our society, and then we just got to let natural immunity and herd immunity take place. That's where we're going to be now. Omicron is going to show you, because you look at the math, right, about the severity, it's going to get everybody to herd immunity. Finally, 2 years into this. And Donald Trump said the quiet part out loud yesterday. We'll play that later. That China, in an interview that was probably not his greatest interview, because there are a couple of things in there I thought were particularly about Fauci that could have been answered better. But hey, it's President Trump. He's going to say what he's going to say. But he did say there yesterday, China, the CCP owes $60 trillion of reparations. 60 trillion. T with a capital T. 60 trillion. And that's off Peter Navarro's number. When Peter Navarro takes the GDPs around the world and the debts have been added up. But I'm holding even the biggest news. The biggest news is Joe Manchin. And this is what lack of respect Manchin and people have for Joe Biden. And this is why, how do you have Joe Biden negotiating with the Russians and the Chinese and trying to be a tough guy when when people in his own party treat him with no respect. Joe Manchin just drops the bomb yesterday. Not that I'm negotiating, not that I think this. He drops the bomb. I'm out. Not going to happen. Not going to vote for it. And he goes through systematically on Build Back Broke how bad it is. They've lied about the numbers. You see it's $5 trillion. They don't have any way to pay for it. They've lied about that. It's terrible for the country. We got to worry about inflation. We got to worry about, what she said, geopolitically. He says we got so many things on plate they got to sort before they do that. Blows it out of the water. But it's not just what he said, it's what he did. He didn't have the respect. He didn't respect Joe Biden enough to put a call in. He just dropped a bomb on him. And of course, Psaki comes out with this, Jen Psaki comes out with a screed. I've never seen a White House point. It was, it was 2 pages of just a screed. Oh, he told us this. He sent us a plan this. Sorry, not sorry. They're imploding all around. You got the squad last night. It's going crazy. Oh, we have to have a vote. Nancy Pelosi said we're going to have a vote. Sherman's going to have all the votes you want. Kristen Sinema said the quiet part out loud. She said they're hiding behind. Told people, there was a tweet out yesterday that she's telling people they're hiding behind my skirts. There's another 12 to 15 Democrats, senators, that don't want Build Back Broke. They understand it's the end of them. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the collapse of regime. Elections have consequences. Stolen elections have catastrophic consequences. And you have an illegitimate regime, illegitimate, and you're seeing it collapse everywhere, across the board. Record invasion on the southern border this month, right? You've got Governor Abbott down there. They're finally building a wall. You got invasion of our southern border. You have geopolitically, we're in a complete disaster. They're trying to stir up some nonsense in the Ukraine so we can wag the dog over there. You got the economy, and you see all the articles this weekend of the Democrats being disaffected. The Democrats don't think he's on the program. The Democrats saying, oh, it's a messaging problem. You look at the buried leads, you go down 10 paragraphs, you'll have actual Democrats at the local level saying, number one, nobody knows what Build Back Better is about. And number two, the food price and gasoline prices are inflation's so out of control, our people can't continue on. And what is Biden going to do? They got to the college. They got to continue to bail out the college, the indoctrination factories of college. That's what they become, indoctrination factories. So we got to pay for all the tenured professors. They got to basically give free college. That's up against the wall because they don't have the money to pay for it. That's got to stop. And everything I do now is saying, oh, we've looked at so many kids out of child poverty because you're giving working class people a tip, $250 a kid under 17 or $300 under 6. You're giving them a tip while you're flooding the zone with illegal alien labor, and you're doing the H-1B visa so they can never get a tech job, while you're crushing them with unlimited, cheap, foreign labor to crush their economic opportunities, while you're allowing the jobs to be shipped over to China, high value-added manufacturing jobs. So all they got is these crummy jobs, these service jobs. Oh, you're going to give them a tip. But now the tip money's run out. Hear me now. Here's what they're going to do in Omicron. They're going to say, oh, it's all going to shut down. The unvaccinated brought this. Oh, we need another stimulus package. And we can't get Build Back Better. I need a $2 trillion stimulus package. You got to, because aggregate demand is going to drop again. They're going to go through a series of lockdowns. You see it happening in Europe. We keep telling you, what happens in Europe comes here about 90 days later. We told you in Austria 1 February, they've already locked down the unvaccinated. 1 February, they're going to come with mandatory vaccinations. We told you it's going to happen in Germany, and the German health minister told us yesterday. Here's what Biden's going to do. To save his illegitimate regime, they're going to sit there and go, it's the unvaccinated, it's the deplorables, it's the Trump insurrectionists. This is the problem. The problem is they brought this upon us. They brought Omicron upon us. We had it all figured out. No, you did not. That's a lie. And Kamala Harris showed us it was a lie. The math shows it's a lie. What, 1,000 people are dying a day on your watch? Hey, more people infected than ever on your watch. You're supposed to be stability. You've had a year. More than enough time. More than enough time. You've had a year. Fauci's a disaster. Collins is quit. You know what? Collins is quit. He wants to get out of town. Collins, preserve your documents, bro. You know, McCarthy says yesterday, sends out to Axios, their big thing, here's all the investigations we're going to have. Go to my Getter account and see, hey, he lays out, we're going to do this. No. It's minor league baseball what he wants to do. We're bringing big tech oligarchs up. We're going to bring everybody that shut down President Trump up. We're going to get Fauci up there. We're going to get to the bottom of Wuhan Lab and the Chinese. We're going to get to the bottom of all of it. We're going to get to the bottom. Collins, his culpability, all of it. Because right now we're winning, but we cannot rest on our laurels. That cannot happen. We've got to go in harder than ever. What has brought this about is you, this audience. And here's what I want to do from this audience. I want you, and it's free. It just requires your spirit and your time. I need you to sign up to be a precinct commitment. Go to precinctstrategy.com. I need you to volunteer to be an election official. Go to be a poll watcher. More importantly, go now to become a county clerk, to work for the county clerk, to volunteer, to be in the room when the count goes. Okay? We saw in Virginia, when you're in the room, the count's accurate, and we win. And they're in full total meltdown. Okay? Also, I want to make sure that you go to school boards. I want you to continue the school boards. School boards, we've got clips we'll play later in the week, can't get to today, about these school boards they're not going to give up. Your gift to America in this holiday season is yourself, your commitment. Because we are winning on a massive scale. Think about it. Do you think we've been here after they stole the election? You think we'd be here by Christmas? You think we'd be here by Christmas? We're winning on every front. Victory begets victory, and now the Democrats are about to turn on themselves, not with long knives, with long bayonets. Okay? Short commercial break. We're going to talk about what really happened on 6th January. You got Darren Beattie. He teed it up on Saturday after he broke this huge story. Darren Beattie from Revolver.News is going to join us next in the War Room.
You were the hero on January 16th. As I say in Chapter 21 of In Trump Time, you were the guy who had the Green Bay Packers sweep strategy to go up to Capitol Hill. Pence is the quarterback. We had 100 people working on the Green Bay team as linemen, halfbacks, and fullbacks, pulling guards, who were going to make sure that we remanded the results back to the battleground states for a couple of weeks so we could get to the bottom of that.
My God, it just says it out loud. Former White House trade advisor Peter Navarro last month describing Steve Bannon as a hero of January 6th because he had a plan to stop the certification of the result of the 2020 election. We had 100 people working on it, he said.
Mika. Yes. And guess what, Mika? Write this down. Take this. All the MSNBC producers all day long should understand something. We're going to get it decertified in Arizona, in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in, wait for it, Wisconsin. We're going to get these electors decertified. Through courts and through General Assembly, state legislatures. We're relentless. We're not going to back off this. And hey, all they want to talk about all day long is Omicron and 6th January, and we love it. That's what I want you to spend all your time on, because nobody cares. We care because we care about the legitimacy of our process. We're a constitutional republic. And guess what? We're going to take over the election apparatus. American citizens that are volunteering. I understand that you don't think that's democracy because the globalists have kind of done the misdirection plays and had everybody looking the other way. No. Those days are over. We're having a little technical problem getting our people up. Darren Beattie. We've got Darren Beattie's coming in to talk about this blockbuster story on Revolver. We've also got Ben Harnwell. Ben Harnwell's in. I got Darren Beattie. Okay, let's go to Darren Beattie. Darren, I want to go to, before we play any of the eclipse, I want to go to your blockbuster story on Revolver. And this is where, this is what McCarthy's got to understand. This is going to be the first thing. We're going to have a real investigation. And we will have Democrats on there. Democrats have to be a part of this. One of the reasons they have to be a part of it is going to rub their nose in it. But this is going to be a real investigation, okay, starting after we win 100 seats in November. So I want Meek and everybody, 100 seats, 100 years. And you guys start to embrace, because once we regain power here, all this stuff's getting broomed to the side. All your efforts to destroy this country, to destroy this republic, and here's how we're going to get the 100 seats. We're going to have 60+% of the Hispanic vote in this country. Yep. Going to happen. You can already tell it. I can already feel it. Down the Rio Grande Valley and these blue-collar areas of Hispanics, they're traditional people. They don't like the socialism, the communism. They don't like the Marxism. They want a shot at prosperity. They don't want to be flooded the zone with illegal alien labor and all the radicalness that's happened on the southern border. They don't want it. They're coming our way. And African-American men are going to vote for us in record numbers because they've had a belly full of this. They see what you're doing with HB1 visas. They see how you're cutting them out of Silicon Valley. They see how you're cutting away for high value-added jobs, and they've had enough of it, and they should have had enough of it. The Democratic Party continues to lie and misrepresent to them. And it's all coming our way. We're going to win 100 seats. And guess what? When we win 100 seats, it's going to be a new sheriff in town. No more nonsense. No more playing games. President Trump says no games. So Darren Beattie, and this is one of the first things we get to, the federal officers involved in, and federal informants involved in 6 January explosive story up on Revolver. So we got about 3 or 4 minutes in this segment. Walk us through it.
Well, yes, and thanks for having me. And absolutely, I think if we had a true January 6th commission of the sort that this country actually deserves, that was interested in getting to the bottom of what actually happened, rather than engaging in performative political theater, this is precisely the bombshell report that would come out of such a commission. And we don't even need to be partisan in our approach, because the truth underneath 1-6 is actually not really partisan. It goes deeper than party politics, all the way to the core of what our regime is and what the power centers of our regime are. And that is the national security apparatus and the various agencies that interfere with the political process, which is why I constantly say the broader lesson of 1-6 and really of the past 5 years is that all of our electoral politics that we think about, that we talk about, that we engage in on a daily basis, all of that is going to be fake and performative until we bring the national security state to heel. I want everyone to keep that in mind as we go through this bombshell report on revolver.news.
Okay, so walk us through. We got a couple of minutes here. Walk us through the main thesis of this. Who are the parties we should be looking at, and how does this investigation go?
Well, this is part 2 of a investigative series on Ray Epps. Now, Ray Epps is an individual who is in the mountains of documentary evidence, video footage of 1-6 and before. He's the only person caught on tape, dead to rights, explicitly calling for this mission to go into the Capitol. And if possible, I'd like to call up the video clip number 1 so your audience can get a visual sense of exactly what he was up to.
To go into the Capitol! Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol! Into the Capitol! What? No! Peaceful tomorrow? I don't even like to say it because I'll be arrested. Well, let's not say it. We need to go. I'll say it. All right. We need to go in the Capitol. These Fed posting? We need to go into the Capitol. I didn't see that coming. Okay.
Monument Hill.
Speaking. We are going to the Capitol where our problems are. It's that direction. Please spread the word.
All right, no, Dave, but one more thing.
Yeah, so we go up there?
No?
When we go in.
Are we going to get arrested when we go up there?
Yeah. We don't need to get shot.
Arrest us all?
Okay, let's I tell you what. Darren, hang on. Let's say this is pretty explosive. That Ray Epps, so he's there pretty obviously teeing people up to go up to the Capitol and go inside the Capitol.
So,
pretty stunning footage. Keep going.
So yeah, I hope all of your audience got to see that video clip and has that seared in their minds as they consider what I'm about to say. This individual, as we saw, the only person caught on camera with an explicit mission to go into the Capitol, which he follows through. He's everywhere on January 6th, all the way up to his presence at the initial fateful and decisive breach site where he whispers into someone's ear and then the breach goes down. This guy is not only not indicted, he's not charged, nothing. The venerable, politically unbiased January 6th Commission hasn't even seen fit to issue this guy a subpoena for his communication records. The feds want nothing to do with him. They've scrubbed him from their public database. He was originally on the most wanted list. They scrubbed him from their database. Now they claim they don't know who he is. So he is just one of several unindicted key players who seems to have played a major role in setting the conditions in advance to turn January 6th from a rally into a riot. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, a lot of the table setting that really allowed January 6th to turn out the way it did, that all took place far before Trump's speech even ended. That initial breach of the Capitol grounds that we saw in that video, that occurred at 12:53 p.m., almost a half hour before Trump finished his talk. And so you have people like Ray Epps and the other very colorful, very egregious individuals covered in this bombshell revolver.news piece who were there at the Peace Monument hanging out very early before Trump finished his speech, who all went on to play key roles in either breaking down the barriers, cutting down and removing fencing, and playing major proactive roles in instigating the crowds. One of the individuals that we see is called Scaffold Commander, and he's standing on top of a scaffold directing people to move forward, move forward, move forward. When the Capitol is breached, he says, we need to fill up the Capitol. Now, this is clip 3, if your people can pull this up so people can get a visual representation of what's going on here. Clips 3 and 4 really quickly. So here's the scaffold. He's up there on the scaffold. You can see him with his bullhorn. Yeah, we should have some subtitles giving us. The subtitles are partially obscured, but he's saying move forward, and throughout the entire day, people could hear his authoritative voice from the megaphone on top of the scaffold saying move forward, move forward, move forward. Now if we can move to the next clip, please, we can hear some more egregious instructions from this guy. He says, okay, we're in, come on. We've got to fill up the Capitol, come on now, we need help. We're going to fill up the Capitol. They got in. Okay, we can cut this clip now, and I can say some more about it. So this is a remarkable thing. We've got this guy on the scaffold directing throughout the day, telling people, move forward, move forward, move forward. When they go into the Capitol, you say, okay, we need your help. Fill it in, fill it up, fill it in. This is not someone who's been arrested. This is not someone who's been indicted. This is not someone that the feds, in all of their interest in your random grandma who took a selfie on Capitol grounds that day, they have zero interest in this individual, just like they have zero interest in Ray Epps. There's another individual we cover in this bombshell piece called Black Ski Mask Man. And he's yet another person who's cutting down the fencing, removing the fencing far in advance of the end of Trump's speech. The FBI doesn't care about him either. They haven't arrested him. And as we point out in this bombshell article, they know who he is because the day before, on January 5th, he was stopped in a van known as the hippie Trump van, that had explosives and firearms that was stopped right outside of the Department of Justice in a terror scare. The feds profiled everyone that they took out of the van. They wanted to get DNA swabs. I don't think they ultimately got swabs. But Black Ski Mask Man was interviewed by the press in his capacity as someone who was taken out of the van that was under suspicion for terrorist activity. Now, 2 things to remark on that. I think your audience hasn't heard of this thing. I hadn't heard of it before investigating for this piece. There was a major terror scare on January 6th with a bus with Trump supporters and explosives and firearms, and the press didn't go wild over it. And the Trump's repeated calls and other people's repeated calls for enhanced securities on 1/6 continued to go ignored after this terrorist scare right outside of the Department of Justice. And furthermore, one of the people apprehended in this bus just happens to be one of the key people who arrived at the Peace Monument early on January 6th and took a key role in cutting and removing fencing before the Trump crowd even got there. So the feds know who he is and they have no active interest in him whatsoever. That's another bombshell story. And so if you go to revolver.news and read the whole piece, we cover a handful of other individuals who played key roles in this, in allowing for 1/6 to occur the way that it did, who are unindicted, and we tell the story of how they acted in coordination together to make January 6th what it became. It's an explosive story. It's not part of the official version told by the January 6th committee, but it's told by video and documentary evidence itself. If we had a real January 6th commission, this would be their first bombshell report, and it would be taking the country by storm. But thank God we have a powerful audience, you have a powerful audience, and this latest Revolver.News bombshell is the hottest piece we've ever run. People are going wild over it. I even have reports from Julie Kelly that the January 6th detainees are in lockdown largely on account of this piece because the detainees were reading it on the tablet that they have that they're passing around, and they got so outraged it necessitated a lockdown. That's how explosive and outrageous this piece is, what in terms of what it exposes.
So I can't just represent the entire War Room article on this show because it's so long. I just can't record the entire thing for you, but I wanted to just let you hear that part and hear you just the open dialogue over several minutes so that you could just get an idea of what they're discussing. And you can see that we're in a total kind of newfangled civil war in politics in Washington, D.C., and you can see that they're trying to haul Steve Bannon up on charges. They're trying to hang this whole January 6th thing on him and make it his problem. But of course, as you can see, as Darren Beattie is revealing, January 6th was a complete invention of the deep state apparatus, the globalist system that controls the conspiracy, if you want, that has provoked this political dichotomy. And they've made, instead of going in there and securing the Capitol and making sure they were directing people away, they had actors in a network in combination making sure that some kind of incident happened and people who were just really bystanders or useful idiots in the crowd would get wrapped up in it, and they would make it into an outrage. And of course, like we said, the main actors, the main violent individuals, the main Antifa with the Trump hat on backwards and the Trump flags around there, like they were fighting and causing all the problems, were never arrested. And a lot of the unindicted co-conspirators, if you will, the agents of the FBI that were there in the crowd that day in order to make sure that it wasn't just a peaceful... and of course, the onus is on the individuals in the crowd, too. Many people stood back. Many people didn't get swept up into it, but they incited a riotous environment and a clamor around the Capitol, and they called it an insurrection, and they used it to enforce martial law and to take emergency powers. And of course, the people that were there were just ultimately the victims of the provocateurs. This is the classic Bolshevik a move. These are classic neo-Bolshevik tactics, and you can see that they were preparing for this, like we were discussing before in the book, The Coming Insurrection by the Invisible Committee. And this was a leftist strategy that they were going to harness and take advantage of, and they were going to turn in a false flag move that this system, including the individuals, the large banks, large companies and corporations in Silicon Valley, social media companies, went to great length to find all the people there that they now were going to consider terrorists. So the whole elitist network, the power elite, jumped on this as an opportunity to push a program of persecution against the people of the United States, against the regular citizens who are concerned about their constitutional rights. This is a process of breaking the Constitution. This is a process of dissolving the democracy in the United States and destroying this country and causing it to break down into just basically another commonwealth of the crown, if you will. Just another administrative state, ultimately, in all the states too. So that's why we have to look to these governors in Texas and Arizona and Florida, and we have to stand with them and support them as they try to maintain the actual nature of the states, because that's what this is, the United States of America. And so those individual state governments have to maintain their sovereignty and make sure that we are, maybe Florida should have its own currency. Right? Maybe instead of relying so much on the Federal Reserve, maybe there should be the Florida silver certificate, right? And then they could put that out. Who knows? But the point is that we have to find ways now to uncouple from the tyrannical apparatus there in Washington, D.C., and we can work hard to make sure we vote. But as we've seen, the technocracy is good at using those machines to manage the vote, and they've probably been doing it for a long time. I'm sure that somebody has to pay for it all. I'm sure that there's some candidates who have to commit treason against their own government in order to make sure that they have the greatest, voting fraud network in history available to them to subvert the vote. And maybe China and Facebook and Twitter and Amazon, all the different companies and Dominion voting machines, maybe they'll all work together again during the midterms to defeat Republicans, even though maybe Republicans are voting 9-1 against Democrats. But who's to say that they're just going to continue the outrageous, arbitrary control of the levers of power? What will you do? What will you do then? What will you do then when there's no way to get an accurate vote count through these machines and through these systems of cheating? Even if you go and have people sitting in your as committeemen, as Republican committeemen and committee women, and they go in there and we do our very best, and we even have a mass overwhelming majority of votes for one direction or another. I mean, they can still ultimately, if we're still using those machines, if we're still using the old system, they will be able to manage it. And they will be able to use the dialectic between Republicans and Democrats and red versus blue as an instrument, a way of controlling this nation and subverting this nation. So we have to do the heavy lifting. We have to take a hard look. And this report that Darren Beatty is bringing forth, it shows that the FBI is now a corrupt new Stasi, a neo-Stasi weapon aimed against the American people. And so that is a terrifying thing. That's the terror of tyranny. It's a new terrorism of the state. And of course, they're going to go into their training seminars, and they're going to go into Langley and to do whatever they have to do to round us up, because we're the kulaks. And it doesn't matter what the ideology is. It doesn't matter how the reasoning works out. It doesn't matter what exactly the thought process is. Ultimately, they have to be convinced that these inbreeds and these country rednecks are a danger, and they're white supremacists, and they need to be, and they're criminals and they're terrorists. And if that's what those FBI agents believe, then ultimately we have a massive, incomprehensible problem in this country that isn't going to be easily addressed just by voting. So we have to be concerned about these people inciting an internecine civil war between the people, when really we have a problem with the 1% globalist party of Davos, who are controlling with their massive money and their massive corruption, controlling the elites and the power players in both parties. It's a uniparty system in Washington, D.C. And as far as the supremacy of the federal government over the state governments, I think we're at a point now where we need to just rethink that. I think we need to depose the federal government and depose this national government and look again to our state governments as the actual nations and sovereign political entities that they were originally designed to be. And they were the original sovereign authorities and the sovereign national enterprises that gave birth to the federal government itself. So we need the state senates and the state governors and the state legislatures to bring Washington, D.C. to heel and to bring them down and to put them in a box and to get this military, industrial, pharmaceutical complex that's now empowering all these global organizations and global banks and World Health Organizations and United Nations and banks of international settlements and all these, the gears and the machinery of the New World Order are being brought to life by the powers of the supremacy of the Washington, D.C. elite. And that was all established, of course, after the Civil War, or the War of Northern Aggression, if you will, established when Abraham Lincoln invented executive orders. So this entire monstrosity is based on, in the FEMA, the camps that are coming, and all this authority that is now propelling soldiers into the streets, 1,000 soldiers in New York State. All this is a result of the wickedness and the fraudulent tyranny that has arisen in Washington, D.C. as a result of executive orders which are unconstitutional. The government is not, in Washington, D.C. was not designed to take arbitrary dictates from the president as commander-in-chief in emergency, under emergency powers. We need to restrict and take away the emergency powers of the executive branch. That's what Donald Trump has to do. That's what any real president that isn't serving the deep state and serving the international elite needs to do. We need to rescind the emergency banking acts and the emergency banking executive orders and all the complexity of this arbitrary Roman law. The Roman law is imperial law, where they just tell you, they write a little note, and all of a sudden people point guns, and all of a sudden it's a law. That's not how this works in America. There has to be legislative, there has to be voting, there has to be legislation, there has to be democracy and self-government that supports those laws. So the executive orders, the executive power, the overreach of that dictatorship needs to be curtailed. And we need men to step up and do that. And it doesn't have to be the requirement of shooting guns and having some kind of warfare. It requires honest men to be brave and to stand against this tyranny. And we need to put people in office who recognize that the act of March 6, 1933, the Emergency Banking Act, and the act of in the Trading with the Enemy Act, and all that duplicity and the framing of a wicked law that happened in Washington D.C. at that time needs to be undone. And we need governors and men of courage who are not lying to the American people, not lying to their citizens, and have the courage to do so. And so, to that end, let's listen to Ron DeSantis.
Freedoms and liberty. Joining me right now is the governor of the great state of Florida, Ron DeSantis. Governor, it's great to have you this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Good morning. Good to see you.
And we do have new worries about the Omicron variant. What have you seen in Florida?
Well, Maria, first I would say that if you look at what's happened in the north in some of these states, they've had record COVID hospitalizations. That is being driven by the Delta variant. And so, yes, we are seeing Omicron in Florida and really all throughout the country. Fortunately, Omicron is not shown to produce the same level of hospitalizations as the Delta variant did. Now, we'll see if that changes, but the numbers of South Africa, I thought by and large were very encouraging and didn't justify the hysteria that you saw by a lot of folks in corporate media. At the end of the day in Florida, Floridians know we will not let anybody lock them down. We will not let anyone take their jobs. We will not let anyone ruin their businesses, and we will not let anyone close their schools. So people are going to be able to live life. They're going to be able to make their own decisions. I cannot believe that something that started with 15 days to slow the spread, now almost 2 years later, you're seeing lockdowns and closures. There are places, Maria, some of these universities, they force everyone to be vaccinated. They force them to wear masks, and they still lock down because you have these cases going up. And so in Florida, people are going to be able to make those decisions. We do put a lot of emphasis, unlike most states, and certainly unlike the Biden administration, on early treatment when people do get infected. And it's not just unvaccinated like they like to say. Our monoclonal antibody clinics that we set up across the state, the majority of people that go to those are fully vaccinated, high-risk people. And so since we've rolled out our monoclonal antibody clinics, we've had one of the lowest hospitalization rates in the country. So we're going to continue focusing on early treatment, and we're going to continue protecting people's individual choices and freedoms.
Governor, a federal judge in appeals court on Friday allowed President Biden's vaccine mandate for private employers to take effect as New York and California are reimposing these mask mandates. It looks like this is going to the Supreme Court. You recently talked about that monoclonal treatment from AstraZeneca, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, on the OSHA mandate, I thought it was a terrible decision. Now, this is just a 3-judge panel. I thought the whole circuit in the 6 would certainly have struck this down. I do think we're going to get positive relief from the U.S. Supreme Court on that. But, Maria, what we did in Florida is we didn't leave it to chance. We passed substantive protections in a special session for Floridians so that they are able to have generous ability to opt out of these types of mandates. And so we feel like we've done what we needed to do to protect our employees. I think it's important from a legal and constitutional matter that something like the OSHA mandate not be allowed to stand. They reached back decades, found some statute, and are using that to force vaccinations. That's never been done in the history of our country. And so I think it's a massive expansion of federal power that goes beyond the Constitution. So we absolutely need to win that case at the Supreme Court. And yes, we had another monoclonal. This is more for preventative for very high-risk people. You take it, and then you got about 6 months of really good protection. And we should be talking about all this stuff. All you hear is the same stuff about masking and lockdowns. We should be talking more about early treatment. Fortunately, in Florida, we are, but that has been a huge problem for the last year when we've had available treatments, and they've not been touted by the powers that be.
Yeah, I mean, Governor, we're not even sure what fully vaccinated means anymore. The other day, Dr. Fauci said, we could be that fully vaccinated means 3 shots, which is 2 shots for the vaccination and then 1 booster shot. Have you gotten the booster?
So I've done whatever I did, the normal shot, and that at the end of the day is people's individual decisions about what they want to do. But these boosters, in terms now, Florida, we ban vaccine passports. We won't let them fire you, even private businesses, over this because we don't think that's appropriate. But one of the reasons why we took those steps is because we knew the definition of vaccination would be a shifting target. And I predicted this a month and a half ago, and people said that I was wrong, and now we're starting to see it come to fruition. So there's going to be people who've done maybe 2 Pfizer shots who are not doing booster, and they could be considered in certain parts of the country to be unvaccinated and then denied the ability to participate in society like everybody else. It's gone way, way too far, and that is a decision that people should make for themselves, but they should not have their rights, freedoms, or liberties restricted based on these boosters.
Governor, I want to talk about the incredible economic performance that you are overseeing in Florida. You just recently did your budget. You were an attorney in the U.S. Navy, and you know all about what has happened in terms of jobs in this country because of these mandates. We are losing first responders. Tell me about the 50,000 job opportunities that you've talked about within your budget. You just recently passed your budget, and you're obviously a smaller budget than New York, but you've got much more success at the end of the day. Walk us through your budget.
Well, first of all, November job report nationally, about 200,000 jobs nationwide. In Florida alone in November, we did over 50,000 new jobs created in Florida. So that's over 25% of the total job output just in one state. My budget is about $99.7 billion. I mean, you mentioned New York. New York's budget's like $230 billion. And I think most people that come here would say we have better roads, infrastructure, services, our K-12 schools perform higher. We have the #1 rated public university system in the country, and we do all that with no state income tax, and in fact have the lowest per capita tax burden in the country, and we have over $15 billion in surplus revenue. I mean, just think about what Washington's doing by printing trillions and trillions. We have over 15% of the amount of money we're spending in budget reserves. And so that is something that's setting up Florida for the long haul. Yes, we have less taxes, and that's part of the reason people have been drawn here. But I think, Maria, since COVID, people know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected. People know they can invest here and not have their businesses shut down. People know that they're going to be able to get jobs here and not potentially be forced out based on mandates. And so I think the fact that we've really stood for freedom, in addition to having good tax and spend policies, has really caused people to want to come work in Florida. And we're producing more jobs per capita than other states, but we have hundreds of thousands of job openings because the economy, is performing well.
Governor, before you go, we're about to talk with President Trump. We don't know if he's going to definitely run in 2024. Will you be running in 2024?
I just filed for re-election last month in the state of Florida for governor. So if people want to support that, go to rondesantis.com. We think it's going to be an important race. And so that's been my focus. I got 22.5 million people, Maria, and on every given day in this season until probably May, we probably have 25 million people in this state with the tourists and the snowbirds. So we've got our hands full, and we're looking forward to a successful re-election next year.
Well, we are just back from Florida, and I could feel the energy in the air. Congrats to you. Good to see you, sir. Thanks very much.
So we don't know any more about Ron DeSantis personally than you or his neighbor or anyone else, but the point is that we need more state governments to use their authority to protect their citizens and to protect their states and to be in the interest of the citizens and the people living in their jurisdiction and under their authority and under their rule. And the people, so all these other governors who are like sycophants of Washington D.C. and who love getting, new shipments of Federal Reserve notes printed off the printer there in Washington, D.C., and getting rich and growing powerful with these new lockdown orders are really just being instruments of the imperialism and the internationalist oligarchy that is really running the show here. And so this is a profound and displaced conflict. And this is an asymmetrical war that can't easily be described. And the way to ultimately protect ourselves and win this war is to make sure that we defend the Republic of the United States and make sure that their strategies and the demagoguery and the casuistry by which they are, the sophistry, the sophisticated art of war weaponry that's coming out of the FBI, that's coming out of the deep state, out of the State Department against your own people. So that's why you have the Merrick Garland over there at the DOJ just releasing 500 random prisoners out of the prisons in the federal prison system because of COVID reasons, and yet they keep these January 6 victims locked up in their dungeon there without any rights, with the total suspension of the Constitution, with these emergency powers. They're absolutely arbitrary. You can see that Biden has no idea what's going on. So this monstrous tyrannical dictatorship, these executive orders, and that this power elite, this deep state behind the scenes is just running absolutely wild and out of control. And so you can see that individuals like Ray Epps, and of course Ray Epps is just an anagram for the term spy rape. So if you take Ray Epps' name and you shuffle the letters around a little bit, it's spy rape. And of course, and this is this kind of intricacy within the details of this whole system that's being sussed out by Darren Beatty over at Revolver. We're totally dependent on these individuals with integrity, with courage, and who are concerned about the welfare of this nation to ultimately reveal this information to us. To this is what's being suppressed. When it comes down to Natalie Winters and these other individuals who are just basically finding the pieces that the rest of the press and the national media and the corporate media are just refusing to reveal. They're continuing to be liars, just the same way that the court case is being handled with Ghislaine Maxwell. Just the same way over at CNN, the place is just filled with pedophiles. Before, a year ago, if you said that there was a pedophile cult on the left and all these Bill Clinton pigs, probably Soros, probably the rest of them, probably all of them, all these pigs in the government, in Silicon Valley, all these Mark Zuckerbergs, tell me you didn't go to the pedophile islands. And of course, if there's one Zuckerberg, he's just some kind of cutout of the intelligence agencies. And so now all these conspiracy theories are coming true because now there's a pedophile cult, and all these low-level, whack jobs over at CNN are just trying to be little junior Jeffrey Epsteins. I guess the the pedophilia supply must have been just dry. So they had, anyway. It makes me barf in my mouth a little bit, guys. Sorry, I'm just working hard just to keep it together, just like you are. Now, but we have to fight this head on. We have to go at this hard. And I know that, what this is going to cost. And so you need to have courage, too. And if you see other individuals out there waging this digital war, pushing forward the truth, and, we are going to fight this neo-American revolution for freedom and independence and the reestablishment of our original documents. I don't want to open up to a constitutional convention where we end up blowing out our documents and enshrining some kind of horrible, monstrous dictatorship in its place. We need to just stay with what the original documents are and just stay with that. That was what ended slavery around the world. Slavery is an institution of the Vatican and of Islam, the Barbary pirate slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade that the Pope had lived on for so long and went to great lengths to establish and ordain, was broken by American freemen. American freemen, a lot of the men on the South in the Confederacy had already let their slaves go. Day of freedom already, because William Wilberforce had already broken the hearts of the British over the institution of slavery and it was already outlawed by Britain by the time of the Civil War. And so was France. France had already outlawed slavery. It was already on the way out. It wasn't really a major issue. Many people, Africans who were in slavery in the South, were breaking free and going north. It was going to happen no matter what. But the point was that the men in the South weren't going to be overlorded by a dictatorship and an imperial power out of Washington, D.C., because it was always to be a limited power, a small government, a government of just limited enumerated authorities, and just basically like a DMV, just a bureaucracy that just to check a stamp and just make sure taxes were collected and make sure certain things happen in a regulatory way, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, the state authorities and the state governments became subordinate, and the federal government became superior, and it became a national government and had superiority, especially in the Reconstruction after Lincoln was shot in the face, and these new executive orders. Every single president has used these executive orders. So until somebody steps in there and shuts that down and puts the de jure republic back together, puts the executive branch back in the box of the constitutional limitations that it was originally designed to have, then we're not going to be a constitutional republic, and this is going to just continue with the wars. And now the coup d'etat and the color revolutions and the wars that the CIA and the deep state and the military, industrial, pharmaceutical complex has been waging around the world, now it's been brought home. And Trump, for whatever reason, whoever he is, if he's with us or against us, we can never really know, especially with these Jesuits running around. Their whole job is to muddy the water and make that a whole gray area of who's who and what's what. So with Trump, I mean, hopefully he's the guy we need, or we get the right leaders that we need. But without that, then the weaponry of the National Guard, of the Marine Corps, of the international, the intelligence community, of the subs with nukes, the whole thing is not something that is there to protect as a governing institution, is not something that serves the American people, but may just enslave and encamp and quarantine the American people just for their own good. So as we're going forward here, we need to introduce some more information into the debate and really just round out the conversation with a wider discussion of what's happening here in the increased centralization of power by globalists using the advancement of technology is really just seeming to crystallize the power of the internationalist oligarchy and the globalists, so that their trend towards absolutism and totalitarianism doesn't seem to be winding down. And you can see that the fascist, the corporatist oligarchy ultimately is aligning with their own interests and with the largely untapped wealth of the Chinese people through the CCP. So the power of the communist dictatorship in China is aligning with the greed and the need for these cartel capitalist organizations in the United States, becoming this international conglomerates in their own right, are no longer interested in or concerned with the welfare of the United States, but have seen that their future, their bread is going to be buttered by Xi Jinping in China and the CCP, in as much as that they need to work with the Chinese dictatorship in order to get access to those markets and to the resources, the mineral resources too, that China is beginning to dominate around the world, which really allow corporations to exist. A good example of one of these corporations who is just a zombie cartel capitalist corporation is totally dependent on the extreme authoritarian statism of the Chinese Communist Party and their extreme inhumane, the atrocities that they commit against their own people. So before 1949, Hong Kong and the region was in control of the British Empire, and they let it fall into the hands of these communists, beginning with Mao Zedong in 1949. So it's crucial that we understand now that the CCP is going to ultimately collaborate and corrupt these corporations in the United States. For instance, Apple. Now it's being reported that Apple had made a $275 billion, that's $250 billion, a secret $275 billion deal with China, with the CCP. to get access to the markets, to get access to their cheap labor. And this is all just to overstep the American workers, so they don't have to build factories here and have to pay for workman comp wages, and to pay even minimum wage here is too expensive for them. So that they have to have this cheap slave labor in China. And we know that the Uyghur populace is being used for their body parts are being killed in mass. Apparently, it's just an open secret that we're getting body parts, that their body parts are being sold in the black market because they're just useless eaters. It's all part of the depopulation agenda. They don't even need them to exist anymore. They just take their body parts, take their eyes or liver or lungs, whatever they need, sell them to rich people in America. And the people in America don't care. As long as their daughter is saved or their loved ones get the organs they need, then they don't care where they come from, right? Just no one talk about it. So that's what happens with the Uyghurs. And of course, that whole drama plays out in the NBA when you have the one NBA star who's standing up for the Chinese people, for the little guy, for just the little worker who could just be destroyed by the inhumane and horrifying abuses of the CCP, who just crush their. You're not even allowed to talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre, right? Back in the 1980. I should know that 1984, right? I mean, what year was that? When they just rolled the tanks over the people and just destroyed them and killed thousands of people and then shut it all up, and now they just erased it from history. And that's part of what Amazon and Tim Cook and Apple and Facebook and Google and just this whole apparatus of Twitter, just the whole apparatus of depraved avarice coming out of these just completely sickening individuals is to ultimately ruin the Chinese people themselves, because they're the ones who curtail the internet. They're the ones who curate the internet so that when you're in China and you're a little Chinese guy and you're trying to look up the Tiananmen Square massacre, Google is like, no. That never happened. That never existed. And so these companies, like we said in past episodes, are getting used to controlling populations, manipulating politics. So all these things are out of Silicon Valley, are un-American, they're treasonous. I don't care about the advance of technology. They're using the freedom of American national sovereignty and political liberty in order to create this mechanism for tyranny. And this is a part of their transhumanist future. They see a cyborg future. They see space travel and everyone's going to be plugged into the Matrix. And so they don't really see any reason to have a constitution or protections or limitations. And so we have to hold these companies accountable, and we have to ultimately hold China accountable. And they're in rising as a hegemony and as the leading superpower, and they're being helped and financed and encouraged and merged with this elite out of Wall Street and out of Silicon Valley, and they're merging with this Chinese communist regime, this dictatorship, in order to create a world where America no longer exists. And so Apple can survive it. The fall of America, Apple can survive that, no problem. They're an international conglomerate. They're a huge, massive corporation. Their numbers are staggering, and they can see the entire landmass of the United States to just go down in flames and be rebuilt, and they have no concern about that. That's not part of their problem. And it's the same thing with this globalist oligarchy, this internationalist elite, who are ultimately the creditors and the bank masters that we owe our debt to, who really, we're in hock to them. We run up on the good faith and credit of the American people. The legislature and the executive branch have run up massive trillion-dollar debts to this international banking system, and we owe them our money. Everything that we have, that we bought, all of our houses, everything we have is in default to them. And I think that people can't comprehend that yet. This is a banking default. And as the currency begins to spiral and devaluate, then things are going to get really ugly. And they're going to take advantage of it. And they're going to try to pigeonhole us with this biosecurity police state, with these tactics of stirring up interscene warfare and political violence among the people, because they look different and their skin is different color, and they have different financial backgrounds, and they have different religious beliefs. So the people are going to be at each other's throats because red, blue, it's just your mind being used as a weapon against you. As you're politicized, as you're polarized, as you become an ideologue, you become a Trump voter or a Biden voter, and you fight against each other, then the purpose is served, which is that ultimately these 1%, the 1% richest and most powerful, are working together to ensure that in the coming insurrection, the coming apocalypse that they're going to descend on the rest of the the world, that they'll be sitting securely in their chateaus with their yachts and with their robots, building robots, and their workforce is being, just like you go into McDonald's now, pretty soon they'll have people, the robots flipping patties. And that's just a burgeoning reality. We're approaching the singularity. So this particular global tyranny is going to be something the world's never seen before. So let's talk about that and the development of power and the betrayal of the American people by the American elite, with what we have to credit Raheem Kassam and Natalie Winters with and Jack Posobiec also have to be credited with the idea that there was an elite merger in this country, and the elites are merging together to turn us into FEMA camps, and they're going to turn the American people into Uyghurs. And that's really what this is all headed to. So as prices rise, as the politics become fatal, as the energy becomes dire, the black pill reality is you have to prepare for this whole shibboleth of American democracy is going to come down, because ultimately, since these executive orders under Abraham Lincoln, the government has not been operating correctly. And these emergency powers that were taken advantage of in 1933, as far as Emergency Banking Relief Act and the different executive orders that accompany that, and the Trading with the Enemy Act, how it was used against the American people in 1930. This is when they created Social Security numbers. This is when they created marriage certificates. You have to certify your marriage at the court with a stamp. So now the court's in your marriage. That all began in 1933. Social Security numbers, death certificates, birth certificates. You have to certify a live birth with the state. That all began. This is the certification of biological property. That's what happened in 1933. They began to certify you as an individual. They stamp your foot with the ink, and they count you, and they serialize you, and ultimately they certify you and register you. Okay, that's what began to happen. This was the default now, after taking all the gold out of the markets at that time. The default now was going to be a default of the American people themselves, as we begin to see that the administrative state is going to start to tell people, you'll take the medicine that we tell you to take, and we'll manage your health cradle to grave, and what's your Social Security number, get in the turnstile, FEMA camp line, get ready. That's the reality of the horrifying black pill reality that we have to face, and people are just obviously not prepared to deal with at this time. So let's go ahead and listen to this fascinating erudition, this high intellectual discussion here, which is what we need. We need some real information, we need clarity, and we need people to tell us the truth. So this is American Thought Leaders, and this is the most profound and essential conversation that Americans need to be having right now.
I would call it greed. Digging into Apple's reported $275 billion deal with the Chinese Communist Party. They're paying off presidents around the world, whether it's academia, our politics, our economics. People are being compromised. Today I sit down with Anders Kaur, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk, columnist for the Epoch Times, and author of the book Concentration of Power. In the past, we've had pandemics, and you did not have this level of individual control by the state. Is the trajectory of history always toward ever greater concentrations of power? Don't ever let a single freedom go. Don't give an inch of territory to the CCP or any other dictator or autocrat. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kelly. Anders Kaur, such a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you.
Anders, it's been a while since we've talked, and since talked on camera, you've actually become quite a prolific columnist. It's actually quite amazing. Every day, every couple of days, I see a new article. And you wrote a really fascinating column on essentially Apple's gift to the Chinese regime, presumably to allow it to function within China's borders and continue functioning. Anyway, tell me a little bit about this reality.
Well, Apple apparently had a secret agreement a couple of years ago with the Chinese Communist Party to give them about $275 billion. It seems like about that in terms of forced technology transfer, development costs, and maybe some other stuff. It wasn't exactly clear from the reporting, but it's a significant sum of money. It seems to have been coerced. Right beforehand, China was not allowing certain things to be on the App Store.
So it does seem like a textbook example of forced technology transfer. Also, before they gave that, to sweeten the negotiations, it appeared like a few days before they gave that, they put a $1 billion investment into Didi. So that was questionable too. It was a ride-hailing app in China that was in direct competition with Uber. And it was at a time when Uber and Didi were competing for market share in China. So it was an American company stepping in to support a Chinese company that was in competition with an American company. And you can see how the Chinese Communist Party is using its power to warp the strategic and tactical kind of abilities and approach that American companies take, that American politicians take, that academics take. It's quite remarkable that the Chinese Communist Party can do this so effectively without more pushback from higher levels of our government, our businessmen, our business people. It's very concerning.
Well, okay, and this of course speaks to exactly the topic of your book. But so how is it that China or the Chinese regime has this kind of leverage that they can do something like this without it even really being known for a number of years?
The CCP has an incredible concentration of power, really, in Beijing. And not only the CCP, but Xi Jinping himself, as emperor for life, as they say, has more power, arguably, than any other single individual on planet Earth. And that makes him a very dangerous person, especially given that he is clearly looking for more power, whether it's personal power over the Chinese people or power over neighboring nations, not only neighboring nations, but power in D.C., power in Brussels, London, Paris. He's affecting and influencing our top leadership globally. And that is, we really need to be concerned about that.
Our team reached out to Apple, but they did not immediately respond. Let's go to this question, because you were talking about the concentration of power, right? So even 10 years ago, probably, I don't know this for sure, but probably the Chinese Communist Party could not have pulled this off with Apple. Or, I mean, Apple was certainly not in China in the way it is. But so maybe I'm already answering some of the question, but how did the CCP get this leverage? Chart it out for me over time.
I mean, let's go all the way back to the 1930s and the 1920s, 1921, when the CCP was founded. They were small. It was a very small party in China. They were able to grow through bringing in workers, peasants, essentially. In the 1930s, they took their first piece of territory. They were supported by Stalin for that. They moved to, they had the Great March back. They waited out World War II, most of World War II, as the nationalists were fighting the Japanese. And then they came in at the end and essentially mopped things up and took over. Now, when they took over China, they had control of one of the biggest raw markets in terms of number of people that the world has. And that the power of that is hard to explain. But even back then in 1949, the British, the Americans, they were all trying to get in to this market and to maintain the market share that they had, because everyone had business in China already. And they knew that to maintain that power or to maintain that market access, they needed the acceptance of the Chinese Communist Party. So all the way back in the 40s, in the 50s, we were actually competing with the British. We were competing with other countries to maintain market share. That has continued over the years. In 2008, when China, in the 70s, we opened up to China. We were hoping that we would liberalize China through more economic engagement. We should have known that we had been engaging with China economically for years, and it did not work to liberalize the CCP. We should have known then. We really should have known in 1989 at the Tiananmen Square massacre that things weren't working. Our strategy of engagement of China simply did not work to liberalize the country politically. Finally, in about 2008, when we had our recession, I think China really decided, or the leadership in China decided, that it was time to take a more forward presence. They felt that they could argue that we were weak, that capitalism was weak, that democracy was weak. And you really saw a change, especially with Xi Jinping coming in around 2012, you really saw a change to a much more aggressive approach. Biding time was a thing of the past at that point. And China moved forward, and Xi Jinping moved forward to expand on his power and start claiming that democracy, capitalism, market approaches to economics were a thing of the past. And that is now where we are. And as China's economic growth has skyrocketed, their military power is skyrocketing. And at this point, they're building more Navy ships than we are annually. And they're building hypersonics, they're building drones, artificial intelligence. In some areas, supercomputing, they're actually ahead of the United States in terms of their technological capabilities. So it's an incredibly dangerous time. And I feel like we haven't, as a nation, really woken up to the threat that the CCP in Beijing provides for us as a nation.
It's remarkable to see, to sort of chart the rise of the Chinese regime and the power that it holds today. But it's like, to me, this was fueled by the U.S. economy, from everything I understand, and the level at which, for example, Apple is dependent on the Chinese regime itself and to be in its good graces that is remarkable. As the world's largest, or close to being the world's largest company, bigger economy than most countries, right? Yet essentially subservient, right?
I think so. It's subservient because it has to have access to that market. So Beijing acts as a gatekeeper to that massive quantity of 1.4 billion people that Apple wants to access. They want those people to buy phones. They want those people to provide inexpensive labor, which is getting more expensive. But they want the polysilicon that they can get from the Xinjiang region of China. China is a massive economy. It's something like 20% of the world's economy or something at this point. So this is, that's a lot of power for Xi Jinping to have. Whereas the U.S. president doesn't have that kind of power. We, as an open system, as a market economy, we prefer freedom. We prefer to allow our corporations and our people to engage freely with people on the outside. But because we have so much freedom, in a sense, our government doesn't have quite as much power as Xi Jinping has, when he can decide to turn off or turn on the App Store for Apple. So they have quite a bit of power that Apple needs.
Well, and they also have the other side, right? You spoke to it a little bit, is the supply chain, like some of the source components, some of the source minerals, but also, they produce those phones there. If the regime decided to look badly at Apple, suddenly, what would happen to Apple's sales globally? It would crater, wouldn't it? It's astounding when you think about that.
Yeah, it's not only the 275 billion. China can ask Tim Cook to have influence on our government back in D.C., which is free for Tim Cook. Tim Cook can come, he can talk to Trump, he can talk to Biden, and he can say, listen, we need, a peaceful relationship with China. I don't want you to make too big a deal about human rights abuse in China, because that might hurt my business. If it hurts my business, it hurts my shareholders, and it's bad for you. So it's the influence that Beijing has over American politics through our corporations is actually quite similar to the influence that Beijing has in other countries, whether it's Uganda or Philippines, they wield quite a bit of power through being able to turn on and turn off imports and exports from between China and all other countries in the world, and they use it in a way that we don't, and that gives them this tremendous power.
And you also started speaking to this, that also there's a kind of maybe the most disturbing sort of power, which is the ability to have us subvert our values, or I guess not prioritize their values so highly as maybe we should.
Absolutely. We have our values, whether it's democracy, human rights, freedom of speech, and we also have our greed. And sometimes we put our greed ahead of our values as Americans, and you can see that quite frequently, whether it's Ray Dalio or Schwartzman or many of the billionaires who are doing business in China. And they say quite outright that they can't look at the human rights issues. They can't look at the governance issues. They're not experts in this. They leave that to government, right? And actually, that is the cue for government to step in and say, okay, well, it's the government's responsibility to ensure that American companies are doing the right thing globally, that other companies globally, Europeans, the EU, Germany, France, Britain, these countries need to make sure and coordinate their approach and their strategy to China so that they make sure that our corporations are not selling out democracy when they're doing business in China.
And that doesn't look very promising to me right now, Anders, from where I sit.
We're certainly not doing enough. The SEC is not doing enough, for example, in enforcing Chinese companies that list in the United States to provide the same level of data that American companies have to provide. So this gives the Chinese companies an advantage. They can do things that American companies can't do, and it puts our shareholders, our investors, and investors globally at huge risk because they're dumping money into companies that aren't required to disclose all of the facts that they should be disclosing.
We know of multiple examples of pretty massive fraud because of this lack of disclosure, right? There's, which of course the Chinese Communist Party leverages all the time. I want to talk a little bit about this, just briefly, about the sort of moral equivalency we heard from Mr. Dalio. Talking about human rights in China. Well, we have our own human rights problems here in the U.S. What do you think about that?
They just don't compare. You can't compare a triple genocide in China of the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Falun Gong to what's going on in the United States. Of course, every country can be better than it is. Every democracy can be, can have a better human rights record. But to compare the two is a total whitewash of China. And a slander on the United States. It's absolutely wrong to say that.
So, do you think that people that say such things, because there are many people that do they believe that?
Maybe he thinks he's going to get a better deal for his investments in China. I mean, I think that if you prove, as a billionaire doing business in China, if you prove to China that you are on the Chinese Communist Party's side, whether it's by saying the right things about China, not saying the wrong things about Taiwan, donating $275 billion in a secret agreement to tech transfers to China. If you prove that, maybe they give you a better deal. Maybe they give you a better deal in a short term that maximizes your short-term revenues, increases your bonus as a CEO, but sells out shareholders down the road. It's a very dangerous position to put your shareholders into because they don't really know why you're giving that $275 billion if it's a secret agreement.
I found reading your book, frankly, a bit disturbing. Okay, you postulate a whole, expansive theory of how power accumulates in societies over time. It's absolutely fascinating to me. The really disturbing part is that, you argue that the process really only goes in one direction, towards increased accumulation of power. And the logical conclusion of that, of course, is sort of, the single global government hegemon, I think, as you describe in the book, and that your expectation on the current course is that will be the very illiberal Chinese communist regime. And that, of course, it's not pleasant to read such things, knowing the realities that you just mentioned.
Right. It certainly could be the CCP that comes out on top at the end of history. Fukuyama, said that in the 90s he believed we had achieved the end of history. It was democratic, it was liberal, small L. And then later he said, when that was clearly not the case, when the rise of Xi Jinping, the rise of Putin, in dictatorial manner made that clear that it wasn't the case, he said, oh, maybe the end of history, we haven't reached the end of history. Maybe we have an illiberal end of history. And so I take that a bit further. I say, I think that the end of history is likely to be illiberal. I think, and I discuss some of the causal mechanisms that get us there. And I liken it to a ratchet. It tends to go in one direction. It tends to go towards the concentration of power. And it tends to, so in a geographic level, the first way that I noticed it was geographically. Over history, tribes, clans, thousands of years ago, tribes and clans would aggregate into larger units. Kingdoms would aggregate into states. States became empires and really big alliance systems like NATO or the Warsaw Pact in the old Soviet Union. So these are growing aggregations of power, and there's a centralization of power that happens in the process over these thousands of years. But that's not the only way that power concentrates. We also see that over time, the state, through its improving technologies, its ability to surveil people more effectively, are able to control our individual lives in increasingly powerful ways. In ways that, on one hand, as we discussed, on one hand, security is improved. We're less likely to get mugged when I'm walking down the street. But at the same time, we lose our privacy. That's just one example. But in general, there is this concentration of power, and you really see it in China. With the growth of the geographical power of Beijing. It's from the 2nd century when you had the BC, when you had the Warring States period in China, to today, you had a process, an aggregation of power in Beijing as a centralized state. But that state is now expanding its influence and power on a global level. The Chinese Communist Party, as Roche Doshi has written in his book, The Long Game, it has a goal of global hegemony. It has a goal of controlling the entire planet. This is accepted truth now in academia. It's Oxford University Press. Roche Doshi works for Biden now in the administration. So this is already accepted. It's a process, I think, that we have to look at, and a historical trend that we have to look at that requires a very active approach to make sure that we don't get there. And we're not doing that today. And that's part of why I wrote the book, is because we need to take a more active approach in defending the liberties that we have now, in defending the sovereignties that we have, the national sovereignties that we have, from aggregation into these really powerful supranational units that do endanger them in the long term.
It's interesting talking about these supranational units, right? I mean, there's a whole kind of bunch of them that exists out there right now. Of course, there's the UN, right, which many people are actually describing as being heavily co-opted by China. There's certainly, there's definitely has huge control over a number of the agencies. And we saw, during the pandemic of its influence on the WHO, for example, a very pivotal UN body, right? So that's one thing. Then we have places like, hyper concentrations of wealth, like at Davos, at the World Economic Forum. There's another power center. Some people will say that this is the most powerful power center of all. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, certainly it's a discussion of whether whether it's in Beijing or not. For you, it might be obvious. I don't know if it is to everybody. But yeah, there's potentially vying, different massive concentrations of power and wealth that will be vying with each other for supremacy.
So that's the end of the show. So we appreciate you guys, and we have a lot more coming in the works, and I hope you'll support us. Really, if you really want to support us at our broadcast, we have a sponsor. So we have Wendy's Boutique Limited, and if you need to get anything for your wife or your sister or your daughter, just women's apparel and jewelry and fine gifts at wendyslimited.com. So if you really want to support us, go over there, and our sponsor is very generous to support us here. So thanks again for coming in.